Chapter 71, Cold Rock's Hold. Chapter text, Chapter Roman 47, Cold Rock's Hold. For the next few days Taija rode high on the pleasure of finally having some progress with the taint. No one else really seemed to understand the significance of it, though, which was a bit depressing. Alexei had been enthusiastic, of course, but she was fairly sure he was just pretending to make her happy. Of course, simply being able to detect the taint was just a start, but she spent her time refining the webs and getting better and better information on it. Taija might not understand why it did what it did yet. That was the kind of question that might take a multidisciplinary team years. But she was making progress at working out what it was and therefore how to affect it. Actually, it was fascinating. She could have happily devoted years of her career to studying it. But while her research always leaned more towards the theoretical, she never ascended too far into her ivory tower. She was well aware that what mattered was practical solutions rather than true understanding. Taija had been in, or at least near, Ruidian for a bit more than 2 weeks when Ames told her that the group would be leaving soon. It seemed that the delay was to allow the Shadow, one of the dedicated tribes, no, that was wrong, clans, to send another candidate for clan chief into Ruidian. Now that he'd failed too, i.e. died because of using dangerous Turangreal, they would need to send another potential chief. However, whoever that was wasn't there, and the wise ones didn't want to wait for them to arrive. It seemed that the plan was now to go somewhere named Cold Rock's Hold, and then on to another place named the Golden Bowl. The various clan chiefs had been summoned to the Golden Bowl, hopefully for Rand to be acclaimed as their chief of chiefs. It all sounded very political. Cold Rock's Hold would just be a stopping point, giving time for other clans to get to the Golden Bowl, and was apparently a much more pleasant place to wait and rest than Ruidian. It was also Amy's and Ruok's home, and Taija suspected that heavily influenced their choice of resting place. Amy's had actually been a relative breath of fresh air for this age. Despite being a powerful channeler, by local standards anyway, and clearly a highly respected wise one, Taija had found she got on with her quite well. Unlike the Aes Sedai, Amy's felt like a real person. She showed her emotions, was willing to have a laugh, and actually told Taija what she thought rather than obfuscating about everything. Even the way the dedicated went on about honor and obligation all the time kind of made sense once it was explained to her properly by Amy's. They seemed a bit obsessed with it and made it all far too explicit in Taija's opinion, but on a fundamental level it made sense. In her own time, social status, even being able to call oneself Aes Sedai, depended heavily on one's actions, both positive and negative, and what one could do for society, and she could feel the similarities. It certainly made more sense as a system than the hereditary nobility that seemed to be favored by most people in this time, or strength in the power like modern Aes Sedai used. Not that they ever seemed to apply that one to Taija, which was even more annoying. As a result, Taija found she was looking forward to seeing Cold Rock's Hold. The dedicated were even more technologically backwards than most nations she'd seen in this time, and she found their warrior culture deeply odd. But at the same time, there were enough similarities in the way they thought and behaved to what she was used to that sometimes she felt oddly at home around them. Speaking of home, the chocolate buns had kept on turning up intermittently. Not every morning, but enough to be a treat she could look forward to. Taija still thought it was rather odd, but she was too busy to put much thought into it, and anyway, why look a gift horse in the mouth, especially when she could put it in her own mouth? Her best guess was that Rand found some bakery in another nation and occasionally traveled there to buy them. Or maybe sent Edram, the man must be able to travel. As for the recipe being oddly familiar, well, it wasn't like there were all that many ways to bake a chocolate bun. She didn't get suspicious when someone made a stew that reminded her of home after all. They didn't travel directly to Cold Rock's Hold. Instead, Rand opened an impressively large gateway to somewhere an hour or so's walk from there. Apparently, it would have been rude to turn up unannounced. Taija supposed it made sense, especially when the people there weren't used to traveling. Actually, she needed to think about whether or not to teach Amy's, and by extension the other wise ones, how to travel. As far as she could tell, Egwene hadn't, which was sensible of her, and she'd be stunned if Moiraine or Cadsuane would share their secrets. It was something to consider when she reached this Cold Rock's Hold. It wasn't long before Cold Rock's hold came into sight. Apparently, all Taija could see was more rock formations, but Amy's pointed out a fissure in the rocks to her. Then everything seemed to get a bit chaotic. Most of the dedicated uncovered their heads and started running towards the hold, hollering and shrieking as they went. Amy sped off with them, but left the other wise ones behind, walking at a more sedate pace. After a moment's hesitation, Taija accelerated to a jog, catching up with Amy's, who, unlike the others, wasn't shouting. Amy's glanced at her and took in her confused look. "It is custom. You must enter a hold with your head bare and make noise so that they know you approach, although of course they will have seen us long ago." "I see." Taija shrugged and pulled off her headscarf. "No point in offending anyone. You're not making any noise, though. The others are doing it for me." Amy smiled slightly. "Also, I am a wise one." That seemed to be sufficient explanation for her. After a moment, Taija decided that was a good enough excuse for her not to have to shout either. It didn't take long to reach the stone wall, and Ruark and Rand led the way into the largest fissure, which extended more than 10 meters across. It was a strange feeling suddenly plunging into dark, cool shade, and without thinking Taija spun a ball of light above her. After a few minutes of walking, the fissure opened into a huge, straight canyon, and she was greeted by shrill cries from hundreds of voices. A huge crowd of dedicated men and women shouting, banging on pots, or making noise any other way they could. It was pandemonium, a horrible assault on her senses, and Taija had to resist the urge to spin webs of air around her ears. Still, the canyon itself was impressive. Its walls were practically green with gardens, hanging vines and houses climbing its sides in steep terraces. It was completely different to any of the other towns and cities she'd seen in this time, or her own, but quite lovely in its own quaint way. Amy suddenly sped off ahead of everyone, and Taija was left trailing after Ruark and Rand, feeling a little out of place. When she came to the end of the canyon, Taija saw Amy stood with another woman on a large boulder which seemed to have been shaped into a platform. She briefly studied the woman beside Amy's. She was similarly dressed, looking like she'd reached the end of middle-aged and wearing quite a lot of gold and ivory. She must have been someone important, judging by the jewelry and the way she was standing. Thankfully, the noise from the crowd of dedicated died away as Ruark stepped forward. "I ask leave to enter your hold, roof mistress." His tone was loud and carried his voice across the canyon. He called her roof mistress, so she must be Lion. "You have my leave, clan chief." Her reply was formal, but then she smiled and added in a warmer tone, "Shade of my heart, you will always have my leave." Ruark's reply was similarly affectionate. Wasn't he married to Amy's? She seemed to be standing there next to Lion quite happily. Next, Ern stepped forward. Presumably he had to ask separately because he wasn't from Ruark's clan. Taija hoped not everyone was going to be asking. It would take forever. He asked leave to come beneath Lion's roof and was granted permission. Then it was Rand's turn, and he bowed before also asking leave. Taija was half tuned out by this point, so she missed his exact wording, but her attention was wrenched back to it when whispers broke out among the dedicated. Lion seemed to be staring for Rand for a while, and then she praised his modesty before curtsying awkwardly. Taija could sympathize with that. Whoever decided that women in this time should curtsy deserved a good kicking. Why, they couldn't just bow politely like she'd learnt growing up and avoid the awkwardness she didn't know. Bows were so much simpler, and yet you could put far more nuance into them. Following Rand were the other three wise ones. Bear seemed to speak for them. "Roof mistress, we request water and shade in your hold." Her tone and words carried none of the implications of submission from the men's requests. As far as Taija could tell, wise ones went wherever they wanted, whenever they wanted in the dedicated lands, so that made sense, she supposed. Lion gave them welcoming smiles, too. "There is always water and shade for a wise one in my hold." Somehow Moirin and Cadsuane seemed to have worked their way in front of Taija while she was grumbling to herself about curtsies, and they presented themselves in front of Lion next. Taija stifled a curse. That meant she was going to have to say something too. She'd hoped she could just come under the wise one's umbrella or something, but she wouldn't accept putting herself in an inferior position to the other two Aes Sedai. Cadsuane certainly didn't bow or curtsy either. "Roof mistress, we request water and shade in your hold." Her tone was faultlessly polite, but she matched the wise one's words. There were whispers among the dedicated again, and Lion responded with another awkward curtsy. "You do me much honor, Aes Sedai. You have my leave." With a sigh and a gesture for the girls and Alexei to follow her, Taija stepped forward next. Cadswain's attitude reminded her, yet again, of how much she disliked the arrogance of people who called themselves Aes Sedai in this time. She'd at least show the girls and Alexei how an Aes Sedai should behave. Taija gave Lion a low bow, appropriate for an honored elder. She'd match Ern's words. He seemed to be the only one who wasn't some kind of chief. "Mistress, I ask leave to come beneath your roof for me, my warder and my apprentices." Again, whispers spread through the dedicated, and there was a long pause. Amy's whispered something in Lion's ear, and then she smiled widely and bowed equally low back to Taija. "Taija said, it seems that the chief of chiefs is not the only modest one here. You need never concern yourself with asking. You have my leave now and forever." Well, that was a bit over the top as responses went, but Taija was nevertheless pleased. In Cold Rock's Hold her routine continued in much the same way as it had for the previous 2 weeks. Training with the girls and, to a lesser degree, Alexei, and working on the taint. As she got more data on the taint, she could start thinking about what to do with it. She had a few ideas, and hopefully at least one of them would work. One thing she wanted to test, though, was its impact on physical objects. For that, Taija wanted something very specific. In her time, she'd have had access to a whole range of exotic materials that could be tested to destruction. Here it was a bit harder. Still, she thought she'd be able to make do if she could kludge something together. For that, she'd need a blacksmith, though. Taija had asked Lion about finding one. Apparently, Cold Rock's hold was blessed with 2 blacksmiths, but the older of them was down with something. So Lion had told her that she'd send her to Tarek of the Cherine Dedicated. It seemed he was new to the hold, having come from the Cherine, but his work was apparently as good as anybody's, and she had no reservations recommending him. Given the uncomfortable weight Lion put on her status as an Aes Sedai, Taija had no doubt it was an honest recommendation. After some wandering, trying to follow Lion's slightly unclear directions, Taija found herself outside an open forge where an impressively well-muscled young dedicated was hammering away at what she thought might be a spearhead. She didn't want to interrupt him, so she stood quietly at the threshold to his smithy, politely waiting for him to finish. Eventually, he stopped his hammering and picked up the metal in some tongs before dousing it in what Taija thought must be the first bucket of water she'd seen in the waste. Job done, he wiped his hands on a rag and turned to her. "I see you, oh." He nearly dropped the rag in his hands. "My apologies, I said. I had not realized who you were, or I would not have kept you waiting." It was a little bit disconcerting how everyone there already seemed to recognize her. "There's no need to apologize. I didn't want to disturb you." Taija smiled. "Are you Tarek of the Cherine Dedicated? You've been very highly recommended by your roof mistress." He smiled nervously. He really was very young. Maybe that was why he was so nervous. "I am honored. What can I do for you?" I said. I need something forged, a pair of iron rods in the form of as perfect a cylinder as you can make them." Taija channeled, and a cylinder appeared in the air between them. Tarek's eyes widened, although he didn't quite recall form the image. She should really have warned him. She always forgot how scared people were of channelers in this time. He seemed to be even more worried than normal, though. "Oh well. I need something the same size and appearance as this." He gathered himself, and suddenly he was all business, looking over the 3-dimensional image hanging in the air before making a few unidentifiable marks on the wall with a piece of charcoal. "Of course," I said, "it would be my pleasure." "Thank you. I also need it to be as pure iron as possible. Definitely not steel. Carbonization will ruin it. But beyond that, no impurities to the point that can be avoided with the tools available to you. Is that possible?" "I'm not sure what's required or if it can even be done without a proper blast furnace. You don't have one, do you? Arc furnaces definitely don't exist in this time." She muttered the last part. Tarek gave her a slow shrug, looking even more nervous. "I am not sure what a blast furnace is," I said. "No impurities. That is difficult, but I will do my best not to fail you." "Thank you. I can pay you, of course." Taija fumbled for her coin pouch. Tarek quickly held his hands up in front of him. "Thank you, I said, but that is not necessary. I would be honored to help you, and I do not wish for or need payment." He almost seemed distressed at the idea. Nonsense. She wasn't going to take advantage of the dedicated. especially not after what she saw in Ruidian. I can pay, and I will pay. To do anything else would dishonor me. Her talk of dishonor seemed to make him wince and gave her time to dig into her coin pouch. She took out 5 gold crowns and pressed them into Tarek's huge hand. They were quite small coins, really, but hopefully it would be enough. Please, just let me know if you need more. Tarek stared down at the coins, looking a little confused for just long enough for Taija to get worried, then closed his hand around them and gave her a small bow. Thank you, Aes Sedai. I require no payment, but what you offer is more than fair. I will have your rods ready for you in 2 days if it pleases you. Taija nodded and smiled. Thank you, that would be perfect. If there are any issues, just let me know. She gave him a bow of her own and headed off. She didn't want to be late for the girls' lessons, who knew what they'd come up with if she wasn't there. And Tarek is the main character of Reedhead's excellent fiction Threefold and has a cameo here in honor of that. Chapter 72. Interlude Roman 23. Chapter text Interlude Roman 23. The competent Forsaken Subcommittee Roman 4. The 3 figures faded into existence in an opulent villa. Frescoes decorated the walls around them while they lounged on beds surrounding a central table piled high with fruits. Of course the food was inedible, but that was hardly the point. Demandred looked around. Not bad, definitely better than the operating theater. This time he was looking quite pleased with himself. What have we got for each other today? Messana was looking smug, but Semirage was practically spitting with rage. So with a sigh he waved magnanimously at the sadist. Why don't you go first, Semirage? She did not hesitate. I am going to fucking kill Greendel, that woman, she argued. Demandred had not seen Semirage incoherent with rage many times before. She had built a persona over the centuries at least partly based around always being in perfect control of herself and what was going on around her, so this quite interesting. What exactly has Greendel done? Messana's musical voice almost, but not quite, concealed her amusement. She attacked the Empress of Sinchan's palace, openly, to steal chocolate. I know we all have our little indulgences, but she has gone too far this time. Too far. I am going to make her suffer for this. For Semirage to call her activities, little indulgences seemed generous. Messana exchanged a look with Demandred, her tone becoming a bit more conciliatory. I can see why it would annoy you. It drove me insane when Ishmael kept interfering with the White Tower, but why are you this angry? For a second Demandred thought Semirage was going to lash out at Messana and prepared himself to intervene if necessary. She really was furious, because she did it openly. I do not care if they are looking for Greendel, good riddance if they catch her. The problem is that, because of her, they are now looking for women who can invert their webs and conceal their ability to channel. I am now having to worry about being discovered simply because she was unable to restrain her urges. Ah, I can see why that would be inconvenient. Demandred did his best to sound sympathetic. Although, are you entirely sure it was Greendel? Well, the way it was described, it certainly sounded like her. Do you know many beautiful, well-endowed, golden-haired women who walk around practically naked all the time and are also powerful channelers? Who else could it have been? Lanfear at least has the decency to wear clothes, not that she would ever deign to change her appearance. Semirage snapped. Anyway, it is not like any of the rest of us are focused on self-indulgence to the point of idiocy in the way Greendel is. Except Ravin, Messana pointed out cheerfully. She really was not helping, so Demandred decided to ignore her and just answer Semirage. A fair point, but even Greendel is usually more circumspect. I am just saying that someone may be trying to make her take the blame for their actions, perhaps to undermine her specifically, perhaps to sow discord among the chosen. He thought for a second. Remember that she was apparently responsible for Samuel's death, and presumably Ishmael's too, given the timing. She was summoned to Sheol Gull to account for her actions, and yet appears to have escaped unpunished. I would not put it beyond her to talk her way out of almost anything, but she must have been very convincing. HMPH. Semirage clearly was not happy with Demandred's point, but did not seem inclined to argue, so he continued with a sigh. Well, I at least have been having a better time. My efforts among the Sharons continue apace, but more recently I have made an excellent new acquisition. You have heard of Mazrim Tame, yes? The other two nodded. Well, the eyes said I had put down his amusing little adventure in dragonhood and were taking him back to Tar Valon to be severed. So I paid him a visit and made him an offer he could not refuse. He is strong in the power, strong enough to be one of us, albeit untrained just like the other barbarians of this age. He's going to be exceptionally useful going forward. Both women looked suitably impressed at his achievement, even Semirage. Next it was Messana's turn. She leant back and smiled. I have a few things to report. Firstly, efforts in the tower are proceeding well. Elada is dancing to our tune now. Most recently she has issued a pair of proclamations. One forbidding any nation from directly approaching the dragon. This will help to keep him weak and prevent him from uniting more nations. I am working on ensuring that when she does interact with him, it's in the least productive way possible. The second proclamation states that Taija Kosola is a dark friend. She finished with a smug smile. I do not see why you should care so much about that. Semirage still sounded thoroughly put out. She is weaker than any of us, and we want her dead, not inconvenienced. Messana smiled more widely and wagged her finger. Demandred really did need to have a word with her about winding Semirage up. It's all about the long-term game, my dear. Yes, this will just make life more inconvenient for her, but it will also call into question the dragon's actions, as she is associated with him. However, most importantly of all, it works to ensure that there can be no reconciliation between her and the White Tower. The last thing we want is the half-drained children of this age having a proper teacher. A good point. Demandred quickly replied before Semirage could get angrier at Messana's disrespect. You said you had more than one thing to report. Ah yes, our fellow chosen. I'm afraid I'm as perplexed as either of you about Greendel's actions. However, I do have a few things to share. She paused to organize her thoughts. Lanfear's spitting mad. As far as I can tell, she's still got no idea where Luz Thurin is, and it's driving her up the wall. The Great Lord only knows what she's up to while she can't pursue her obsession. That at least got Semirage to smile. She always had had a particular hate for Lanfear, although Demandred had never worked out why. Ravin is also in a foul mood. I pity whatever women he's using at the moment. Demandred doubted that. Messana had little room for pity in her. Obviously, I haven't spoken to him myself, but I gather that he tried to attack the dragon in the Stone of Tyr and was rebuffed by one of the half-drained children of this age. Embarrassing, but amusing nevertheless. He would have to be careful, though. Ravin was hardly the most skilled channeler out there, but with his strength in the power it should not have been possible. Indeed, now finally, saving the best for last, I've been speaking with our favorite little spider, and she knows where the dragon is and also where he will be. Of course, her being her, she's too cowardly to take any action herself, but I think there's opportunity here for us. Chapter 73. Cadsuane is helping. Chapter text, chapter Roman 48, Cadsuane is helping a couple of days after her visit to Terek. Taija came awake with a jolt. Something had just triggered her wards, shadow spawn, somewhere in the hold. She embraced Sedar as she rolled out of bed, but before she could give any warning the sound of horns and the clashing of gongs rose up. Some bloody use her wards were then. She always was better at wrecking them than putting them up. With practiced speed, Taija pulled on her boots. Her nightgown would have to do for modesty. Nynaeve could be scandalized at her later. A few seconds later, she was running out into the corridor. There was nothing outside her room except armed dedicated running to face the enemy, many of them having just grabbed their spears without bothering to don any clothes at all. Taija followed them, jogging rapidly upstairs carved from stone to get out to the open rock above the canyon in which the hold nestled. She could already feel Sedar being channeled and hear the crash of explosions. More explosions than could just be accounted for with that amount of Sedar, she thought. Presumably, Rand had already joined the battle. Taija wasn't sure how he found her, but as she emerged into the open air, Alexei was suddenly by her side, seeming to appear out of nowhere. It must be all the training he did with Lan, and now the dedicated. She spared him a nod as she scanned the darkness, looking for enemies. Unfortunately, none were to be seen, just the sound of battle around her. Taija hated night fighting. What she wouldn't give for some night vision goggles right now, but the times when she could have those were sadly long gone. That was presumably why the shadow spawn attacked when they did. The darkness would drastically reduce the effectiveness of the numerous channelers in the hold. More fool them. There was no good reason to be fighting in the dark if she didn't want to. With a thought, Taija spun fire, air, and spirit into an inverted web high in the sky. Force of habit from the war made her offset it some distance from her own position. Then she tied off the web and added a complex knot of spirit to it. Job done, she mentally started counting down. Alexei, in just under 20 seconds we're going to have plenty of light. Don't look directly at the sky and find somewhere where you're not exposed. Given the way things seemed to work in this time, she'd be surprised if there were any enemy channelers, but it was still good to teach him proper precautions. Taija followed her own instructions, hunkering down behind a protrusion of rock. A few seconds later, night turned to day as her web triggered, a second sun hanging in the sky. The shadow spawn would be easy meat for her, Rand and the others now. A moment later, lightning came crashing down on the ground directly beneath her light. What the fuck? Inverted Sedin. Either way, someone just tried to kill her. Had the madness taken Rand? No, that was ridiculous. It must be a dark friend or one of the Forsaken. Regardless, she was glad that she was careful. Taija spun her own webs, inverted air, fire, and water, taking advantage of the effect of her unseen opponents, channeling on the sky to make it easier to bring a storm of lightning down onto a group of Trollocs she could see moving below her. This time she sensed Sedar flashing out, monstrously strong, and had to draw hard on the power to deflect a gigantic fireball whirling towards a clump of dedicated. This was bad. Given the strength on display, the Forsaken must be making a play. The question was which one. Taija spun a series of inverted blossoms of fire around the point the fireball had come from. If they weren't skilled enough to invert their webs in combat, she'd make them pay for it. Even as she spun, her instincts screamed a warning, and she sliced something, Sedin, that was thrown in her direction. Fuck, two of them. Taija grabbed Alexei's arm to get him moving and sprinted away from her hiding place, towards the chaos of the fighting. At the same time, she cut her own web above the hold, plunging everyone back into darkness. No point making it easier for the Forsaken. She shouldn't have assumed the only channelers would be on her side. Stupid. Still, what were the Forsaken doing there? If they knew where they were then, they must have realized there was enough firepower here to beat them. The bestial muzzle of a Trolloc loomed ahead of her, dimly visible in the moonlight, and Taija incinerated it with a thought. She could see flashes of fire off to her right, but couldn't feel anyone channeling. It was probably Rand. She needed to help him. If the Forsaken were getting directly involved, then he must be the real target. Lightning and fire flashed back and forth through the darkness as Taija ran towards where she thought Rand was. Shapes loomed out of the shadows. Some were dedicated, giving her curt nods as she passed. Others were shadow spawn. She burned those to ashes without slowing. It didn't take Taija long to get there, but she found Rand under attack by not only Trollocs and Myrddraal, but also the power. Edram was holding the shadow spawn off with an expertly wielded sword, but Taija could see Rand was being beaten down as thick webs of Sedar came flying from the darkness, bombarding him and the area around him. They all vanished or were deflected, but they were getting closer. Judging by the amount of the power being thrown at him, there were at least two of the Forsaken engaging him, or possibly one with an angriel. The male Forsaken seemed to have been striking at targets of opportunity rather than Rand. Taija didn't hesitate. Inverted webs of lightning and fire sprang up around her and flew towards the source of the Sedar. A huge swath of the desert outside the hold erupted into blinding light. She wasn't holding back. If she could catch them by surprise before they realized she joined Rand, it didn't work. She must have missed. The webs coming her way doubled. Two women, with angriels, perhaps. Immediately she was on the back foot, frantically cutting and deflecting webs. Rand seemed to be disoriented. Was he struggling with not being able to see the webs? Taija was suddenly taking on most of the burden. Her mind worked blindingly fast. She could ignore that fireball. It was off target. Those webs would create lightning, slice them now. An unexpected inverted web nearly got through her defenses before she cut it. Taija put up anti-traveling wards wherever she stayed for a good reason, but right now she was cursing them. She was fairly sure the Forsaken were outside the wards, and she couldn't travel through them. Nor could she travel around inside them, because she needed to stay with Rand for his protection. She hated standing there in a slugging match. It didn't play to her strengths, and particularly not when she was severely overmatched in raw strength. Alexei had focused on the encroaching shadow spawn, along with Edram, both holding them back with sword and staff, and small fireballs in Alexei's case. Where were the wise ones? Moiraine and Cadsuane, even the girls. There were enough channelers in Cold Rock's hold that even 3 or 4 of the Forsaken should have been relatively easy to beat back. The Forsaken must have known that too. Their attacks were intensifying. Then a third set of webs joined them, set in based on the feel as Taija tried to defend against them. She couldn't handle it. It was too much. Edram was there, wielding his sword expertly, slicing through any shadow spawn foolish enough to get within reach. But that was all he was doing. Was it because of her? Taija wasn't even totally sure where all of the Forsaken were, but they'd zeroed in on her and Rand. Shed had to switch total defense, splitting her flows too many ways to cut, block, and deflect. A fireball guttered out. A blade of air dispelled into a gust of cool wind. Earth rumbled and then subsided under her feet. She couldn't keep it up. She was going to make a mistake sooner or later, if Rand didn't first. A fireball slipped through and detonated near Taija, sending her tumbling into a heap. She ignored the pain that shot through her. It was irrelevant in the face of survival. She needed to hold them off until the others could get onto the battle. Taija sliced a web here, deflected air and fire there, wielding the power like a scalpel, splitting her flows all the way to her limit. As she channeled, she tried to clamber back to her feet and nearly screamed at the pain it sent through her leg. She'd need to fight from the ground then. Fine, but she was losing. She sliced Sedar before it could turn into a blossom of fire between her and Rand. There was a pause in the fighting with the shadow spawn, and Edram glanced back at the two of them. She was going to die. This was ridiculous. She needed him. Edram, Taija screamed. For fuck's sake, I know you can channel. Stop fucking hiding it, you rock-brained idiot, and use the power before you get us all killed. He froze for a second, shock on his face, and then suddenly the assault on her slackened, something disrupting many of the webs before they could reach her. Taija was struggling to focus on anything other than her own desperate channeling through the pain in her leg, but she saw lightning striking in the distance. Thank the light, he'd listened. He seemed to have slotted very neatly into her defenses too, filling in her gaps without having to discuss it. He must have been very good. The exchange went on for a few more moments as Edram and Alexei retreated towards Taija and Rand. Then, suddenly, the attacks with the power stopped. The Forsaken must have fled. Taija supposed they would have been working to a deadline to avoid getting trapped between all of the channelers at Cold Rock's hold. To her side, Rand collapsed to one knee. He must have been exhausted, and Edram moved to stand beside him, awkwardly not looking at her. Taija realized she was panting for breath through teeth gritted from pain. She tried to stand again and then sank back to the ground with a whimper. Was her leg broken? It felt like it. She wasn't going to look. Still, she was alive, and so were Rand and Alexei. That was what mattered. The shadow spawn seemed to be gone too. Maybe it would be okay to pass out now. Taija released Sedar with a sigh of relief and twisted to ask Alexei to help her find Nynaeve, or Moiraine, she supposed. Then Edram shouted, panic in his voice. Rand! Taija tried to whirl and nearly screamed from the pain, but she managed to turn far enough to see a sinuous black shape moving with blinding speed, already upon Rand, its sword descending. Even as she embraced Sedar, ignoring the distraction of her pain, and began to spin, she knew she was too late. Flows sprang into being between her and the Myrdral air, water and spirit feeling achingly slow when suddenly Edram was there, throwing himself forward, taking a strike from the Myrdral's black blade across his chest as he did so. The Myrdral died, killed by Taija's web before the two of them hit the ground, but it was too late for Edram. It was a deep wound, blood already welling fast from it. Taija blanched as Edram landed and rolled off the corpse. Why was he looking over to her? Why was he smiling? It's funny, he croaked. Who would have thought I'd die saving the dragon? He flopped back onto the ground. More of this false dragon idiocy. It wasn't at all funny. No one else is dying here today. She needed to find Nynaeve or Moiraine. Rand needed his teacher, and she didn't care what the man did as a false dragon. With the way people of this time treated male channelers, she could hardly blame someone for becoming one. More importantly, he was clearly a loyal comrade, whatever his past. Stifling the agony in her leg, Taija put as much urgency into her voice as she could. Alexei, Rand, we need Nynaeve or Moiraine now. You can travel as long as you stay within the wards. Find them. Go, now. Cadsuane had a couple of days of freedom from working on the taint since Taija had gone and got herself injured in the attack. While healing could deal with injuries almost miraculously well, one still needed time to recover afterwards, and Nynaeve had seemed decidedly unlike an apprentice when she had informed Taija she would be spending the next 2 days in bed. The girl really could be quite forceful. Of course, that attitude would have been dealt with if she had been properly trained. Speaking of Taija, the woman's look of unimpressed disappointment at Cadsuane's lack of knowledge of the taint just kept on rolling through her head. Her poorly concealed distaste at Cadsuane's achievements was even worse. What more could she do? It was not like she had just abandoned the poor men after their gentling. She was not a cruel woman. She had done everything she could to help them, far more than most Aes Sedai would have. Cadsuane scowled to herself. She should not let Taija get to her, but in this case she could not help it. She had prided herself on her status as the best, most experienced Aes Sedai when it came dealing with male channelers, but Taija was sadly and painfully right. She knew little about the taint itself, so she was reduced to a mere dog's body, holding painfully complex weaves in place to allow Taija to do the real work. She felt useless, something she certainly was not used to. Still, personal knowledge was not the only way in which she could be useful. An idea had come to her, and the more she thought about it, the better she liked it. She might not know so much about the taint itself, but she knew someone who did, someone who knew as much as anyone alive. The only question was how to get her in front of Taija. In the end, she decided she would do what she always did, face the problem head-on. That was why a day later Cadsuane was riding into Tar Valon, having traveled to a suitably discreet location nearby. She did not believe what had been said about Eleda being a dark friend, but it was undeniable that the tower had split and something was going on, so she would need to be careful. As such, she rode with her hood up, stored her horse in the city, and entered the tower through one of the less well-known back entrances at night. The guards would not know who she was, only that she was Aes Sedai, and would likely respect her order to keep silent, at least for long enough for her to be out of the tower again before any questions were asked. Cadsuane quickly made her way through the darkened corridors. There was something off about the atmosphere here. She spent as little time as she could in the tower, but there was an oppressive feel to the place that she did not remember from her previous visits. The time of night meant that she was able to make her way through the halls unnoticed, wending her way up to the area of the tower claimed by the Red Adger. It was there that she went to one particular set of rooms. She hoped that she had remembered correctly. It really had been some years since she was there. Still, she knocked without hesitating, waited a few seconds, and then knocked again, harder. After a moment, she heard the sound of movement from inside and grumbling. A little longer and a bleary-eyed, elderly Aes Sedai opened the door looking ready to launch into a diatribe. "Cadsuane, what are you doing here, bothering me at this time of night too?" She stepped aside. Come in, come in. I do not suppose I will be getting any more sleep tonight regardless. I had thought you were dead, you know." Despite her ageless face, her hair was snow white. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this visit?" Her tone suggested it might not be all that much of a pleasure. "It has been a while, Savriti. How are you?" When Savriti just raised her eyebrows, Cadsuane continued without a hint of embarrassment. "I need your expertise. You know more about the taint than anyone I know of, and something has come up where that expertise would be invaluable." The woman was almost a brown, despite the red shawl that hung by the door. "I suspect that you would also learn a lot from it. Of course you want something." Savriti grumbled and did not even offer to make tea. Rude. "Why else would you be here to see me? After midnight, no less. I suppose you want me to go herring off with you into the night too." She did not wait for Cadsuane's response. "Well, I will not. It is late. I am old and I want my sleep. Come back in the morning and I will see what I can do, but I am not leaving the tower even if it is for the dragon reborn himself." Cadsuane scowled at her, but Savriti simply looked back at her, completely unruffled. This was the problem with truly useful people. They were much harder to intimidate. For a brief moment she considered simply shielding her and dragging her out. She had little doubt that she would be able to. But no, that would be counterproductive. Savriti would hardly be inclined to help if she did that, and regardless, the woman was her friend. Fine, she would just have to explain things to her. What if I said it was for the dragon reborn? She kept her tone mild. Savriti gasped. What have you got yourself involved in now, Cadsuane? Have you not heard Aleda's proclamation that only the tower itself may deal with him? Do you know what you risk? He may be mad already. Pah! Cadsuane dismissed that instantly. I do not give a fig for Aleda's proclamation. I am Aes Sedai, not a child, and he needs to be handled with care. He is not mad yet, I can tell you that much. You mean you have spent time with him? Cadsuane nodded. Yes. Have been advising him. The reason I want you is, she really hated having to reveal information unnecessarily. There is someone who thinks she may be able to find a way to deal with the taint, not by gentling the poor men, but directly, to save the dragon reborn and other men who can channel. Savriti stared at her for a second. You say the dragon reborn is not mad. I am now wondering whether you are. The taint cannot be dealt with. The greatest minds of the Age of Legends tried their best. 3,000 years of effort have not seen one iota of progress. The taint is here to stay. This was aggravating. She had already revealed too much, and now it seemed she would need to reveal some of Taija's secrets too. I thought the same as you until recently, but as I said, there is someone who thinks they can do it. Taija, and Aes Sedai from. Savriti cut her off. Taija, you are now associating with her, calling that woman Aes Sedai. You really have gone mad. She is a dark friend, of the worst kind, and no Aes Sedai. Eleda has had a proclamation issued, there can be no doubt. Cadsuane blanched, briefly losing her composure. A dark friend? Eleda, like what has that idiot woman done? She quickly brought her anger under control. I can assure you that Taija is not a dark friend. She is also Aes Sedai. She likely has more of a claim than you or I do. Oh, it galled her to admit that. Savriti was clearly unconvinced. I do not know what kind of schemes you are playing with Cadsuane, or how you have been able to convince yourself of these things, but you are playing a dangerous game. She gestured at the door. I want you to leave. Out of respect for our friendship, I will not sound the alarm if you leave immediately. Cadsuane sighed to herself. It seemed that open communication had not worked, and she would have to return to Plan B. She rose to her feet. Very well. I am sorry you said that, Savriti. I am also sorry about this. She embraced Sedar and struck, slamming a shield into place on Savriti, binding and gagging her with air at the same time. She really had not wanted to do that. The look of both outrage and fear in Savriti's eyes made her feel all the worse for it. She could not just walk out of the tower, dragging a shielded Aes Sedai behind her, of course. If only Moiraine or Taija, or even one of the girls, had been willing to teach her the trick of inverting weaves. Still, no point crying over spilt milk. She supposed she had not done much to endear herself to any of them. She would just have to try to conceal what she had done as much as she could. A weave of tied-off air barred the door. It would take a sister to get through that, and it would be a while before enough concern was raised to get a sister to try to break into another's rooms. Then she opened the doors to one of Savriti's cupboards. She would weave the gateway in there. If she closed the doors behind her then, even if someone did have the talent for sensing residues, they might not see what was left of her gateway before it was too faded. As Cadsuane wove her gateway, she pondered what she had heard. The news about Aleda's proclamations had truly shaken her. Where she had dismissed the tales of the new Amielin being a dark friend before, she now had to give them a great deal more credence. It was undeniable. The woman was either a dark friend or the biggest fool to sit in the Amielin seat in centuries. Chapter 74. Retirement was boring anyway. Chapter text, chapter Roman 49, retirement was boring anyway. The gateway fizzled into nothing, sending a shower of sparks through Savriti's cupboard. What in the light? Cadsuane stared, speechless for a second, then realization hit her. Wards. She cursed silently to herself. One of the Forsaken must be here. Not unexpected if she engaged her brain, something she had apparently been failing to do in recent times, but still a terrifying thought. Taija was bad enough, and the woman was fundamentally nice. She was already assessing her options. Iron-hard eyes flickering around the room. This was not a good situation. She could just walk out the way she had come, but now she had another Aes Sedai bound and gagged behind her. Without Savriti it would be easy, but light damn her. After going to this effort, she was not going to leave her behind. The taint was more important, and if she left Savriti now then, there was no way she would ever get another chance at this. It would have to be the hard way. She turned to face her friend. possibly former friend now. Well, Savridi, it seems things are not going entirely to plan. I truly am sorry, but this is more important than your dignity or even my life. Cadsuane turned to the door, floating Savridi behind her and ignoring the woman's furious facial expressions. There was no way that she would be getting out of the tower without incident at this point, but the longer she could delay it, the better her chances. Perhaps, if she ran into the right people, she could enlist their support instead of fighting them. Unconsciously, she reached up to touch the ornaments hanging from her hair. It seemed some of her secrets might be revealed too. Despite her anger at her own foolishness, there was a certain exhilaration to it. Retirement, tending to her roses, that was just waiting to die. This was living. Not that she would ever admit it to anyone, but light she had missed the rush. With a thought, Cadsuane wove the mask of mirrors around Savridi, overlaying the image of a large case on her, making the threads as small and fine as possible. She had at least been doing rather more practice on precision weaving recently. It would not convince anyone who looked too closely, but it would likely deflect the attention of any non-channelers and the lazier or less skilled among the Aes Sedai. Enough procrastinating. She took one last look around the room for anything potentially useful. The sooner she started, the sooner she would be out of the tower, and the last thing she wanted was to delay for long enough that people started to wake. As she removed the weaves around Savridi's door and glided out into the corridor, Cadsuane looked as composed as ever, but someone who knew her well might have noticed the faint tightening around her eyes and lips, the way that her eyes scanned back and forth. Cadsuane had only been moving for 2 or 3 minutes when she first encountered somebody. An Aes Sedai came hurrying up the corridor, heading towards the Red Adger quarters. It took her a moment to work out who it was. Danelle. The dreamy brown was not the worst person she could have encountered, but perhaps not the best either. Hopefully, she would just go past. Indeed, Danelle barely seemed to shoot her a glance until they had almost reached each other. Oddly enough, there was no recognition in her eyes. Surely her head was not that far into the clouds. Then she suddenly came to a halt, her eyes flicking from Cadsuane to the case, floating in the air behind her. Danelle! Cadsuane nodded to her, not breaking a step, conscious of the way Sedar glowed around her. Danelle frowned. What are you? Cadsuane had no warning. The light of Sedar never sprung up around Danelle. However, suddenly there were flows of spirit, a razor-sharp shield flying towards her. Strong, far too strong. The crescent moons went cold enough that she could feel it even without them quite touching her forehead. Danelle's weave dissolved around her. Cadsuane did not wait, she was already channeling. There was no need to worry about the 3 oaths. This was not Danelle, it could not be, hiding her ability to channel such strength. She did not hesitate. Adrenaline flooded through her. Taija had beaten her, but she had been thinking about that, how to deal with any rematch. Now she would see how one of the Forsaken compared. Weaves of fire and air sprung from Cadsuane, ripping through the space between them, the air burning around her. With a jolt, the weaves snapped back into her, severed. Cadsuane suppressed a wince at bad memories and redoubled her assault. Fire shrieked towards the impostor. The ground under her feet came apart, and blades of air sliced at her. Yet the Forsaken casually deflected everything Cadsuane could throw at her, even while directing her own weaves at Cadsuane, only to see them vanish. Cadsuane immediately tried to force the woman into a link, but as with Taija, nothing happened. Not unexpected, but still a pity. This might be worse than with Taija. Cadsuane was still not sure how strong Taija actually was. The woman's secrecy was infuriating, but she already suspected whoever was impersonating Danelle was stronger, noticeably so. She must have an angriel, but then she was fairly sure Taija did too. No one could be that strong naturally. She allowed weaves to strike her where she judged they would not be a danger, ignoring the cold above her forehead, and focused on cutting weaves directed into the air around her or the stone beneath her feet. Thank the light, this woman did not seem to have Taija's infuriating habit of inverting her weaves. Cadsuane wove, razor-sharp air, desiccating weaves of air, water and spirit, simple fire. She carefully did not attack the Forsaken, because that was what she must be with anything indirect. For now, the woman seemed to be struggling with her Turangriel, and she absolutely did not want to give her any ideas. The floor under her feet shook, the whole tower seeming to vibrate from a deflected weave, and Cadsuane staggered forward. Even with her Turangriel, she could not match this woman. Still, She had ideas. She was no helpless prey for one of the Forsaken to scoop up. Sedar flashed between them, and the woman sneered. "Is that a Paraly's net that you're wearing, little Aes Sedai? It won't save you." She sounded nothing like Danelle. It was a similar accent to Taija's, all harsh consonants, although in this case the emphasis seemed different. No doubt, then, one of the Forsaken. Cadsuane forced herself to smile, allowing an explosion of fire against the wall to make her stagger, bringing her closer. So much strength, but this woman was not truly a fighter. She could already tell. Taija had been, despite every sign she gave off, this Forsaken was not. No doubt, eventually you would overwhelm me through sheer strength, certainly little else. Excellent. A flash of anger in the woman's eyes. She was more controlled than Taija, but nothing compared to the women Cadsuane regularly dealt with. Cadsuane's voice was completely level, small twitches the only sign of the cut weaves snapping back into her. Suddenly gongs and bells began to ring around the tower. Perfect. However, you are on a time limit. How will it affect your plans if Dreamy Danelle is found wielding so much of the power in a duel with me? The Forsaken's eyes widened slightly, and the vigor of her assault redoubled. I'll have long enough. I'll have you worshipping at my feet as I make you kill your closest friends. A block of stone ripped from the wall behind Cadsuane and slammed into her. That would have crippled her if not for her six-pointed star Terengriel. Instead, the impact shoved her painfully forward, but pain was an inconvenience. It did not matter now. Cadsuane's own weaves superheated the air around the Forsaken and were almost immediately cut, but she was nearly close enough. A smooth step forward, and she was almost there. The Forsaken's eyes widened, and with terrifying speed, all five elements came together in front of her. An instant later, a blinding beam of light connected her to Cadsuane and vanished, the threads making it up dissolving to nothing. Balefire, it must have been. Cadsuane did not give her a moment to recover, ignoring the purple afterimage flashing across her eyes. One last step and she was close enough. Idiot woman. With a loud crack, Cadsuane's forehead met the Forsaken's nose. With a howl of pain, the woman fell over backwards, clutching her face. Definitely not a fighter. Impressively, she kept her hold on Sedar, but was distracted for long enough for Cadsuane to direct a vicious kick into her face and another. She should have worn proper shoes, not these slippers. At the same time, Cadsuane continued to throw weaves down at the woman, nearly landing them through her frantic defense. Channelers, particularly women, never expected you to get physical, not even Taija had, and with her six-pointed star Terengriel, Cadsuane was hardly afraid of being hit herself. Cadsuane raised her foot for another kick to the Forsaken's blood-covered face when two huge slabs ripped out of the floor, slamming into her and throwing her back down the corridor. Ah, the Forsaken had finally started to think. Still, it had been a good try. They both clambered to their feet. For all her bravado, Cadsuane was in pain. She was an old woman, and her body was reminding her of that right now. If she was lucky enough to survive this, she would be paying for it for a while. The Forsaken, on the other hand, was covered in blood. Cadsuane suspected she had broken her nose, hopefully removed some of her teeth as well. Rage painted her enemy's face, and she looked like she was about to say something, but then there was the sound of running feet and shouting coming down the corridor. "Oh dear," Cadsuane smiled through her pain. "It appears that your time is up. What will it be? Revenge or discovery? You must have spent a lot of time working on your plans here. It would be a pity to see them fall apart just because of me." The Forsaken hesitated for a second, and then turned and ran. Excellent. Cadsuane resisted the urge to clutch at her back. Now for the rest. First, though, she turned back to Sevridi, letting the illusion around her fade. "You saw that. Are you willing to cooperate now? It would make things considerably easier for both of us." Unfortunately, the fool woman just had anger in her eyes and seemed to be trying to shout through the gag of air. A pity, she always had had a bit of a temper. Perhaps once she had had time to process what she had seen. Cadsuane rewove the illusion around her and started on her way again, choosing a different path to the Forsakens. Hopefully, she could avoid the people coming to investigate too. To her mild surprise, Cadsuane actually managed to make it most of the way out of the tower proper before anyone tried to stop her. She was approaching one of the smaller entrances when the pair of Aes Sedai appeared from around a corner and came to a shocked halt at the sight of her. "Cadsuane, what are you doing here? I thought you were dead." Varnine was a green of middling strength. With her was Hattori Gaetano. Cadsuane offered them a polite nod. Varnine, Hattori, I am afraid rumors of my demise are somewhat exaggerated, and I have come out of retirement. If you are looking for the commotion, I believe it came from that way. Cadsuane gestured behind herself. I would accompany you, but I have urgent business that must take priority over every other concern. Instinctive deference to Cadsuane's strength and reputation had both Aes Sedai moving almost before they thought about it. Then Hattori paused, glancing at the illusion floating behind Cadsuane. Why are you holding the power? What is it that you are trying to sneak out of the tower? Cadsuane had to give the woman some credit. It must have taken courage to be so blunt. Yet she did not have time for this. Every second of further delay reduced the odds of success. You question the affairs of another sister, Hattori. Have standards fallen so far since I was last here? Unfortunately, the woman did not back down. There have been statements from the Amulin rumors. I think it would be better if you waited here with us, just for safety. With her reference to Aleda's proclamations, she skirted dangerously close to suggesting the Black Adger might be among the Aes Sedai, to suggesting Cadsuane might be involved. Of course, the former was true, even if the latter was not, but it was shocking that she would go so far. Are you implying? Cadsuane allowed false outrage to enter her voice. Unfortunately, she had no time to convince these women. She struck, shields easily sliding into place on both of them. Fools, if they had truly suspected her, they should have been holding Sedar. She bound them with air and shifted them to a side corridor where they would hopefully remain out of sight before tying the weaves off. Fortunate for you that I am not Black Adger, but they do walk among us. Next time you suspect someone is a member, perhaps take more precautions. Cadsuane patted Hattori's cheek and turned to leave. Someone would find them soon enough. The next problem came when Cadsuane reached the courtyard outside the tower, so close to freedom. He had encountered a few tower guards on her path, but they had done no more than bow and continue on their way. Of course, no man in Tar Valon would defy an Aes Sedai. The real problem was the three Aes Sedai who came running into the open space in front of her, skirts hiked indecently above their ankles. They were led by Alvarin. Was she not Aleda's keeper now? The light of Sedar glowed around all of them. Cadsuane Meledrin, stop. You are under arrest by order of the Amulin. Release Sedar now. Cadsuane kept walking, closing the distance between them. No, I do not believe I will. Alvarin at least was quite strong. Together they might be able to overwhelm her, if not for her Turangriel. Of course she could not use the power as a weapon against these women, not now, not without the certainty that they were Black Adger. Not that she wished to. Still, she had other tools. The crescent moons went cold, and weaves of air and spirit vanished around her. Well, that secret was likely already out of the bag. No matter. Cadsuane channeled, her own weaves of air and spirit cutting off Inine, the weakest of the three women, from the power, too easy with her angriel. She wove a touch of air, fire, and spirit around herself, and her voice boomed out, unnaturally loud. Aleda is either mad or a dark friend. I have just fought one of the Forsaken, disguised as Danelle, in the tower grounds. Any sister who aids Aleda turns her back on the light. Cadsuane jerked as the weave was cut, a look of thunderous fury on Alvarin's face. How dare you? The two remaining eyes said I was strong, certainly, but nothing compared to Cadsuane and her Turangriel. She started to think she might actually manage this when more women came running into the courtyard, the glow of Sedar bright around them. 4 of them were linked, a truly powerful shield dissolved against her Turangriel a second later. This was untenable. She would have to reveal her greatest secret. Cadsuane's lips turned down in distaste, but still, what was the point of having a trump card if you did not use it when it was needed? She focused her mind on the sharp-finned fish dangling among her Turangriel and released the shields around Savriti and Inine. First Alvarin, she was strongest. Cadsuane pulled through the Turangriel, and suddenly she could feel Alvarin in front of her. That bundle of sensation told her satisfaction was suddenly turning to dawning horror. Next was Alvarin's other companion. Then Savriti and Inine, released from their shields, embraced Sedar too. Perfect. Another thought, and there they were. Cadsuane drew on Sedar, pulling through the 4 other women, their strength added to hers. With contemptuous ease, she batted aside another attempt at shielding her. Another 2 women had joined the link facing her. That made 6. It would not be enough. Still walking towards the exit, Cadsuane cut her opponent's weaves and wove her own attacks, carefully avoiding anything she considered to be a weapon. Shields, bindings of air, painful switches to distract. Nothing truly dangerous. It was frustrating fighting with one hand tied behind her back, but regardless, she had no desire to hurt other sisters. Another two sisters came running into the courtyard, drawn no doubt by the feel of huge amounts of Sedar being channeled. Cadsuane pulled them in two with a thought. 7 in total, including her own strength. It was enough. She forced a shield into place on the linked sisters. She had never channeled so much of Sedar. It was incredible. The light of Sedar winked out around them, and Cadsuane turned to leave. There was no one left to stop her. Just as she reached the gate that marked the edge of the White Tower's grounds, she felt it, a huge weight of power behind her. Oversized threads of air slammed the gate shut in front of her, and as she turned, she saw what she feared. A full circle of sisters, led by Cien. She had been so close. Already they were throwing the power towards her, huge weaves, more powerful than she could hope to counter for long. Unless Cadsuane released the shields on the sisters who had been in the original link. As she frantically fended off the circle, she watched from the corner of her eye as they gasped and reached for Sedar. The second they embraced it, she had them, pulling them into her link. 8, 9, 10. They had no idea what she was doing, just ambling straight into her trap. 11, 12. The last of them embraced Sedar, and Cadsuane had 13 now, a full circle of her own. It was a heady feeling channeling so much of Sedar. Fire blossomed around her, and she pushed the weave away almost casually. Still, she could not stay and fight. Cadsuane wove air and spirit, throwing them at the other circle, more to keep them distracted than with the aim of hurting them. Even if they had decided she was a dark friend, she was still bound by the 3 oaths. Then, with a thought, she gripped the very walls around the gatehouse and pulled. Earth, air, and fire came together, and with a groan, a section of the tower's walls came away, ripped into the air above the courtyard. Cadsuane was already running, using the women in the link's own strength to bind them in air and pull them with her. The women attacking her seemed to have paused, staring slack-jawed at the groaning, creaking mass of stone hovering in the air. With a thought, she threw it behind her, careful not to hit the other Aes Sedai, and wove a complicated and ostentatious, but completely useless ward behind it. They would be scared of causing more damage to the tower and cautious of what she had left behind the rubble. It would take them a little while to get past that. Now she needed to steal a horse fast. Then she could decide when she was going to release her companions. She would need to be sure she was both out of sight and free of the wards before she tried to travel again. Taija had better be suitably grateful for this. Chapter 75. Ale Humor. Chapter text, Chapter L. Ale humor. Frustrating as it was still kind of nice to be forced to stay in bed for a couple of days by Nynaeve. She really needed to work on her bedside manner. Taija didn't appreciate being threatened with being tied down if she tried to get up, but it was the thought that counted. Anyway, it was an empty threat. It wasn't like Nynaeve could actually stop her if Taija decided to fight. Ultimately, she'd been working far too hard, and with the tiredness that came from being healed, she spent a fair part of those 2 days sleeping. Despite that, Taija still managed to get quite a few things done, especially with the number of people that seemed to want to come and see her. One of the first was Amy's, who looked down at her with an amused smile. Perhaps when our apprentices are the ones daring to tell us it is time to stop and rest, we should listen. Taija muttered something about lack of respect from the young, and Amy's smile widened. You remind me of a friend who was so stubborn, if you told her the day was hot, she would sit all day under the sun to prove it was merely warm. Taija raised her eyebrows. You, of course, no one would ever have called stubborn, Amy's chuckled. You would make an excellent wise one. Study under me for a year and you could join us. Immediately, Taija responded with a laugh of her own. That's funny. I was thinking you'd make an excellent Aes Sedai. Give me a year and I'd have you ready to serve. Truly, the dedicated are fortunate to have you as an example to us. Amy's tone was wry, and with a smile she leant forward. Now, stubbornness is important, of course, but it can be taken too far. Sometimes it is better to bend before adversity. Let me tell you a story. A stone dog and a maiden of the spear are hunting together when they come across a lion. Run, says the maiden, and begins to flee, but the stone dog dismisses her and says, I do not run from anything. He raises his spear and kills the lion where it stands. Amy's paused as Taija wondered where she was going with her story. The maiden stops and turns to the stone dog. You are a terrible, terrible hunter, she says. With a shake of his head, the stone dog denies it. Why, I am a great hunter. I have killed this lion. The maiden shakes her head in turn. It is 5 miles back to the camp. You can haul the lion yourself. It took Taija a moment to process, and then a smile grew on her face, and she started to giggle, Amy's laughing along with her. All right, that's actually quite funny. I get the message too. She stopped for a second to think. I've got one for you. Took her a moment to adapt the joke for the dedicated. An apprentice stands in the waist searching until she sees a wise one walking rapidly by. The apprentice asks, Is it a long way to Ruidian? The wise one replies, Not too far. So the apprentice joins the wise one. After a day of silently walking beside her, the apprentice asks again, Is it a long way to Ruidian? The wise one replies, Now it is a long way. Amy's broke out into an unladylike guffaw, and Taija joined her in her laughter. She'd been a little worried Amy's might be annoyed by making wise ones the butt of the joke, but she seemed to appreciate it. So much better than these days, Aes Sedai. They exchanged a few more jokes, and Taija found she could really appreciate the dedicated sense of humor. It was sideways, and mostly based around sarcasm and social embarrassment, with a bit of darkness added in. Perfect. Of course, some concepts just didn't quite carry over. Her joke about corruption on the Grand Council was met with a blank face, and she was fairly sure she'd missed some of the nuances of honor and obligation in Amy's jokes. Still, it was fun. After a while, Taija remembered there had been something important she wanted to talk to Amy's about. Traveling was spreading around the world, and these dedicated had effectively pledged themselves to Rand. They were also, Benny aside, the first properly adult channelers that she'd met that she actually liked. Taija was quite sure the Aes Sedai would keep their secrets from the dedicated, even if it was really her secret, and the girls wouldn't teach them anything like that without her permission. Ultimately, she felt teaching traveling to Amy's was the correct thing to do and just a nice gesture. There were too many secrets in the world, and anyway, if the Forsaken wanted to teach their minions to travel, they wouldn't need her help. Amy's, I want to share something with you. You've seen the Aes Sedai spinning gateways. I'd like to teach you too. First, though, we have to have a bit of a talk about proper safety procedures. Another visitor was Tarek the blacksmith, who diffidently came to Taija's room. I see you, Taija, said I. I hope I am not bothering you. When she shook her head, he unlimbered his backpack and pulled out the iron rods she'd ordered. He was a big man, but Taija was still mildly surprised at how effortlessly he could carry them. A quick bit of mental maths told her they should mass around 30 kilograms each. I hope these are to your satisfaction. He made to hand one of the rods to her, and then clearly thought better of it, placing them on the ground next to her bed. Taija propped herself up to have a better look, spinning an invisible web of earth and spirit to delve them. They weren't bad, actually, much better than she'd expected from such a technologically backward society, but still much less pure than she'd have hoped. Thank you, Tarek, they're perfect. A wonderful job. Thank you, Taija, said I. Instead of leaving, he hesitated a second and then reached into a pocket and pulled out what looked like a golden brooch. This is a gift, said I. He held it out to Taija as she protested. This isn't necessary, please. It is a greater gift to me than it is to you. If I could say that I had forged the first piece of dedicated made jewelry to decorate an Aes Sedai, I would gain much honor among my fellows. So take it, please. After a moment, Taija reached out and took it, with both hands as was polite when receiving a gift. Thank you, Tarek. I shall treasure it. She examined it carefully, turning it in her hands. It looked like he'd partially melted down the gold coins she gave him, and then reshaped them into the half of the Aes Sedai sigil that the modern women used. She could see that it was a fine piece of work, but really not her style at all. Also the associations with the White Tower. Still, it was a sweet gesture. Taija supposed she should wear it at least until she was away from Cold Rock's hold and could safely hide it in her bags without offending him. While Taija had been resting in bed, her mind hadn't stopped working, chipping away at the problem of the taint. She had so many variables in her head by then, imagery of the bits making up the taint, its characteristics, and its interaction with the world, and more importantly with the power. Metal rods were no doubt going to be useful, but they weren't plan A. There were things she wanted to try that wouldn't need them. As Taija lay in bed, she spun webs again and again, predominantly spirit, but interlaced with all four other elements, carefully threading the flows together as finely as she could, studying each web and then letting it fade before she tried again, one characteristic or another tweaked. Her first choice of solution was the web that she was playing with. She thought it was going to work. To some degree anyway. She hoped it would, but regardless, she needed backup plans. When Taija was back on her feet, she found to her considerable distress that Cadsuane had been on an adventure in her absence. "So let me get this straight, Cadsuane," said I. "You went to the White Tower, fought one of the Forsaken, and then battered your way out through the walls while fighting off their best efforts at stopping you." It sounded utterly unbelievable, but she shouldn't have been able to lie. "That is correct." Did she have to look so smug? "And you did this so that you could kidnap an Aes Sedai who was unwilling to come voluntarily because she might know something about the taint?" Cadsuane nodded, and Taija exploded. "You can't just go kidnapping people who haven't done anything wrong." Cadsuane blinked, and then smoothly replied, "I do believe I just demonstrated that I can do exactly that." Taija let out a growl of frustration. Cadsuane was trying to wind her up. She must be. "You know exactly what I meant. Raids on enemies are one thing, but kidnapping innocent people is quite another. If you lose your own moral principles, then how are you better than?" She sighed and forced herself to stop talking. She wasn't going to impress the woman with a lecture on morals. Cadsuane was probably already beyond help. "Fine, whatever. I suppose I'd better meet her then. At least you didn't bring half the White Tower with you." Cadsuane smiled. "Yes, of course. Follow me." A minute later, she'd led Taija to her room, where a small, white-haired Aes Sedai sat bound by air and with a shield in place, looking utterly furious. Taija grimaced when she saw her. "Savriti," said I, "please accept my apologies for Cadsuane Sedai's behavior. I do not condone kidnapping." She glanced at Cadsuane. "Please, could you at least release her from the air? It's not like she's going to go anywhere in the middle of the waste." For a moment, Taija thought Cadsuane was going to argue, but then the bands of air around the woman disappeared. Taija offered her a small smile. "I'm sorry about this. My name is Taija Kosola Murinen. Hopefully we can." Savriti didn't let her finish, interrupting her with a hard and decidedly uncowed voice. "I know who you are, dark friend. I will not aid the shadow." Taija sighed internally. Had Cadsuane just done this as revenge? Chapter 76. Even Q and Garwin couldn't have done that. Chapter text, chapter Lee. Even Q and Garwin couldn't have done that. The next day Taija was already regretting suggesting that Cadsuane brought Savriti along to observe her efforts with the taint. "It is impossible, girl, and I have no wish to associate with dark friends." Savriti crossed her arms, defiance painted across her face. Cadsuane made as if to intervene, but Taija stopped her with a gesture. "Fine. If that's how you see it, then your life's work is pointless, but far be it from me to try to correct the childish behavior of yet another of this time's Aes Sedai." Taija reminded herself that Savriti had just been kidnapped by Cadsuane before she went further. Turning away from her, she spoke to Alexei. "I'm going to try something on you. I'm sure it's safe, but it might be uncomfortable, and you'll need to release Sedin. Do I have your permission?" Taija doubted any of the modern Aes Sedai would bother asking. Consent seemed to be a distant concept to them. "Of course, anything." He nodded firmly. "I'm ready. Thank you." She took a moment to think. This might not work, but she thought it would. She'd certainly modeled it enough in her head. If it did, well, she'd wipe the smirk off that infuriating woman's face. With a breath, Taija started to spin the web, uninverted so the others could see. She went much more slowly than normal. This took serious precision, even by her exacting standards, and she really didn't want to get it wrong. First came the heavier framework of spirit, laid over her friend, then she tweaked the flows just so. It looked like a shield, until closer examination anyway, when an observer would realize there were thin patches in it that wouldn't hold a determined channeler back. Then Taija started on the hard part, interweaving the other four elements into her framework. Thick strands went around the solid bands of spirit, but the intricacy was in the thin parts. There it felt like she was spinning a microscopic multicolored carpet multiple times over, all at the same time. That was fine. It was just a concept. She'd do it faster next time. After a few seconds, Taija finished the web. All of the women were looking at it, fascinated, even Savriti. Moiraine broke the silence. That is extremely complicated, most impressive, but what is it meant to do? Taija gave them a faint smile, trying to ignore the tension in her shoulders. Please let this work. Alexei, please could you try to seize the power slowly? Don't draw more than a trickle and describe what you feel. He gave her a slight bow. I'm visualizing the void, emptying my mind. I can feel the power just outside it. He frowned slightly. There's something odd about it. It's harder to reach, but I think I still can. There was a pause, and then his eyes widened. What? What is it? Taija leant forward eagerly. Alexei suddenly smiled, the most relaxed, beatific smile she'd seen from him since he'd found he could channel. It's clean, there's nothing, just pure Sedin. There was a heavy hint of wonder in his voice. Taija wanted to explode with joy. Fuck you, Savriti. Fuck you, Aes Sedai. Can't be done, they'd said. She restrained herself from shouting, although she couldn't stop the grin from growing across her face. Brilliant, just brilliant. Just don't do anything for now, hold where you are. She went over her web, minutely looking for weaknesses, anything that could go wrong. When that was done, she continued, trying to keep her voice level and the excitement out of it. All right then. Now I want you to spin something small, just a trickle of power. Maybe pick up that rock there with air. Taija waved over to a pebble lying on the dusty ground. At the same time, she fed more strength into her own web, enough that without the angriel it would be a strain. Alexei gave her an eager nod, and a second later the rock floated into the air while he stared at it wide-eyed, as if he'd never channeled before. It's clean. He sounded stunned, looked stunned too. The rock fell to the ground, and he spun to face Taija. Suddenly his arms were round her, and he was spinning her round, laughing happily. Despite Taija's discomfort at being grabbed by the bigger man, she was still grinning. This once she was willing to put up with it. The only fly in the ointment was the three stony-faced Aes Sedai. Savriti just sniffed, but Cadsuane seemed to be willing to voice their doubts. This is no doubt good news, but how can we be sure that Alexei can truly tell? Taija sighed, having fended Alexei off her. Trust them to bring things down. Still, to be fair, they had 3,000 years of cultural inertia. Have you linked with Alexei to feel the taint for yourself? She was pretty sure none of them had. If you had, you'd realize it's hardly something you can mistake. When Cadsuane confirmed she was right, because of course they hadn't, Taija continued. Fine, it's easy enough to demonstrate. Alexei, would you be willing to link with Cadsuane? I suppose Moiraine too, so that they can lead the circle. He nodded. Great, thank you. I'm going to release my web so that she can experience the taint first. There was a bit of shuffling around. Taija kept her eye on Savriti. Cadsuane had tied off the shield on her, and Taija wasn't sure any of the modern Aes Sedai knew how to break a tied-off shield, but she was ready to act if she was wrong about that. Savriti wasn't very strong anyway. Taija released her web on Alexei, and a moment later the light of Sedar sprung up around Moiraine and Cadsuane, merging together. It didn't take long before Cadsuane's face twisted. Light! They have described it to me before, but this, it is everything I expected, and yet worse. A moment later, Moiraine had the same reaction. Cadsuane must have passed control to her. Taija nodded. It was still unbelievable that a self-professed expert on dealing with male channelers never tried to find out more, but that didn't matter now. All of you release the source and break the link. I'm going to replace my web now. She started to spin. She really needed to think of a good name for the web, actually, something catchy. The Kosola detained her. No, that was terrible. Taija's great filter. It sounded like a part for a pretentious washing machine. Tell was always better at that kind of thing than she was. Light, why did she have to think of the bastard? With an effort, Taija yanked her thoughts back on track. Right, it's in place. You can link again. Then just channel a trickle. This is still experimental. Sedar's light appeared around Moiraine and Cadsuane again. After a second, Cadsuane gasped, her composure broken, and a look of wonder that Taija had never seen before in her eyes. Oh, Light, you were right. We were not just wasting our time. She suspected Cadsuane hadn't meant to say the last bit. Suddenly there was pressure on her web, and Alexei's eyes widened. Wait, slow down. Several rocks started to rise around her, and in a panic Taija drew hard on Sedar through her angriel, putting everything she had into the web. A moment later it flew apart, shattering under unseen pressure, and she felt a stabbing pain in your head. bad enough to drive her gasping to her hands and knees, Sedar fleeing from her. Fuck! Alexei was by her side almost instantly, helping her back to her feet. The pain in Taija's head subsided rapidly, and she rounded on Cadsuane. What the fuck do you think you were doing, you idiot woman? I said a trickle. Are you trying to burn me out? Only Alexei, calming hand on her shoulder, kept Taija from saying more. It's all right, Taija, she drew more, but it wasn't much more, honestly. I don't think she realized. Cadsuane had gone white and released Sedar, her hands held palm out in front of her. I am sorry, Taija said. It was only a relative trickle. I did not think I was doing anything dangerous. Taija wanted to keep shouting at her, but that might just be the pain in her head. If Alexei said it wasn't much, then she believed him. Cadsuane shouldn't be able to lie anyway. All right, I'm sorry for shouting. I was just shocked. Savriti sniffed again in the background, and Cadsuane suddenly whirled to face her. I do not know why you are so insistent on this unhelpful attitude. You have just seen what is possibly the greatest miracle of the last 3,000 years. The taint was gone. There is no way anyone could mistake it. You love your history book so much. You should be taking notes for your own book because you are seeing history being made. Perhaps Cadsuane was a bit more stressed by that than Taija had thought. Over the next couple of days, Taija started to carefully test and refine her web. The first thing she needed to do was to make sure that if it failed, it didn't do any damage to the person holding it. Even if it didn't risk burning them out or doing any permanent damage, inflicting crippling pain was bad enough. She thought that was solved by a tweak to the way that the flows wound around each other. It should make the web more flexible, so that it would bend and come apart gently rather than shattering under pressure. Taija's euphoria at her success was tempered by the limitations of her web. She quickly found that it took hugely more strength to hold the web compared to the amount of clean sedin that it allowed to be channeled. Alexei wasn't particularly strong, yet anyway. Who knew how strong he'd become if she could solve the taint as an issue? However, even after making refinements to the web and drawing fully on her angriel, Taija found that she couldn't hold the web when he tried to do anything significant. She even tried linking with Nynaeve, Egwene, and Elaine to add their strength to her. To her surprise, Moiraine was actually willing to lend Nynaeve her angriel for the test. However, Alexei was still just about able to break the web. It was depressing, but she eventually had to conclude that her taint filter was only a partial success. Still, it was a proof of concept. She'd been able to come up with it. There must be other things that would work. Unfortunately, it was also tiring to hold the web. Even for Taija, it was hugely complex, but to be effective, it had to be held. When she tried tying it off, it seemed to lose much of its effect, shattering under even the tiniest strain from Alexei channeling. Even amongst the other women, only Nynaeve could spin it usefully. It was partly a question of strength in the power, but much more so one of fine control. The others' best efforts let the taint seep through, and Nynaeve, for now anyway, didn't have the strength or control to be anywhere near as effective as Taija. Ultimately, the conclusion Taija had to come to was that while her web was a nice idea, genius in fact, its practical utility was limited, and she might have to go back to the drawing board. Still, she wanted to show it off to Rand and Edram. They were the ones, along with Alexei, suffering under the burden of the taint. Even if this wasn't the ultimate solution, it would give them hope for the future. She was also proud of what she'd achieved, particularly without any proper support or infrastructure. In her heart, she could even think to herself that she wasn't sure anyone else from her time could have done this much, certainly not so fast, but she'd never be so immodest as to say that out loud. Rand seemed to have had less and less time for Taija, but eventually she got him and Edram alone. After explaining to them what she'd done, Rand curtly indicated to Edram to go first. So Taija spun her web and watched his eyes widen as he channeled. "It's clean," he murmured before he turned to her and took a step forward, tears glistening in his eyes. She thought for a second he was going to grab her like Alexei did and instinctively took a step back, but he just stopped and stood looking at her with eyes shining. "Thank you, Taija," said I. He gave Taija a low bow of gratitude, correct in every respect. It would have fit perfectly into a formal occasion at the Hall of the Servants' Ard, but Rand was stepping forward, looking bored by the whole thing. Taija asked him to release the power and then spun the web again. His eyes widened, and she saw a small flame appear in the air in front of him. Light! A smile made its way onto his face as he murmured the word. Then Taija felt the pressure increase as he drew harder on the power, her web flexing. A second later it broke, and she was glad she'd tweaked it enough that it didn't hurt. Taija smiled at Rand, but he was scowling. With a snarl, he kicked at the dust. Typical women, about as useful as Latra Posse. Grand promises of solutions, and then I get left with a lame duck like the Choden Cal. Next you'll give me a Silverwing with no engines, and ask me to bomb Bel Daradir. Before Taija could reply, he spun on his heel and stalked away. Taija stared after him, horrified. What? Just what? Confusion at where he'd heard those words warred with hurt at his dismissal of her efforts. She'd poured everything she had into dealing with the taint, and had made more progress in a couple of months than anyone else had in 3,000 years. Edram was staring at her, and she scrubbed at her eyes with her sleeve. He might be loyal to Rand, but she didn't want him to see weakness in her. Where had that even come from? Rand shouldn't have known any of those things. Actually, even she didn't know what the Choden Cal were, a failure by the sound of it. Taija. Edram's voice was soft, hesitant, impolitely overfamiliar, and then he seemed to remember himself. Taija said, you shouldn't listen to him. He's just under a lot of stress. He knows how much you've done for him, really. I do too. You should be proud of yourself. Kuangaruin Salaman himself couldn't have done what you did. It's fine, you should. Taija's mind caught up with what he'd just said. How do you know that name? In a world where so many names had been forgotten, Kuangaruin was just too much of a coincidence. Was that panic in Edram's eyes? I read it in a book. There are so many old libraries out there. Taija's mind went back to her time as the Lady Alfreda and her excuses to Benny whenever she knew something you shouldn't have. Had she really sounded that unconvincing? I suppose Rand also read about Latra Posse, Silverwings, and Bel Daradir in a book too. Her tone was sarcastic, but at least tears no longer threatened her. She drew deeply on Sedar just as a precaution. Edram winced. All right, I'm sorry I lied to you, it's just... Rand. He wiped the back of his hand across his forehead. This is very difficult to explain, but Rand, sometimes, when he's stressed, he seems to remember things from the Age of Legends. Was that a grimace? Was it at Rand, or was it the Age of Legends? Sometimes he speaks as if he was there and I heard the name from him when he was talking about what you were doing. He said it to me. Not even Kuangaruin could succeed. He saw Taija's frown and hurried on. I think, sometimes, he's speaking as if he's Luz Thurin himself. Her eyes widened, all other thoughts banished. Do you think it's the madness? Edram shrugged. Perhaps, or perhaps it's that he's the dragon reborn and remembering life as Luz Thurin is part of that. Either way, he needs our support. Taija nodded, her mind whirling and suspicions forgotten. If Rand really was going mad, then she needed to do more faster. The filtering web clearly wouldn't be enough. After a moment, she looked back towards Edram. You pronounce names in the old tongue very well. Where did you learn it? There was no hesitation in his response. Thank you, but I'm just copying Rand. I suppose if he's remembering it, then he must be saying it right. He flushed slightly and rubbed his nose. Funny, Tell always used to do that when he was lying. One of Tell's tells. Heh. Taija wondered whether the same was true of Edram, but his explanation made sense. Still, Kuangaruin was an odd person for Rand to bring up. He couldn't have known that that was the man that had inspired her to go into science in the first place, a towering figure that she'd looked up to all her life. Even if he was getting Luz Thurin's memories, the man had hardly known her. She didn't think he'd have known that. What a coincidence. She supposed Kuangaruin had been world famous. Anyway, she needed to be thinking about the taint, not Rand. It seemed time was running out. As Taija headed back to her quarters, the weight of the world settled back onto her shoulders. Chapter 77. Interlude Roman 24, 2, Forsaken, and an Aes Sedai walk into a bar. Chapter text Interlude Roman 24, 2, Forsaken, and an Aes Sedai walk into a bar. Moirin kept her face schooled in its usual mask of calm composure as she made her way past the two ale maidens standing guard into Rand's room. He was staring at the wall, clearly brooding. He had been doing far too much of that recently. After a moment, she broke the silence. Thank you for taking the time to see me, Rand. She gave him a very small curtsy. He had grown up so much since she first met him in Immen's Field, a far stronger, harder man than he had been. She was not sure she liked all the ways he had changed, but it was what it was. Yes, what is it, Moirin? It's late, so please could you make it quick? He would never have dared to speak to her like that before Tyr. I wanted to speak to you about Taija, he cut her off angrily. Not you too. Like I said to Edram, I'll apologize to her tomorrow. Now was that all? Moirin did not allow her surprise to show. I was not coming to ask you to apologize to her, although if you have wronged her then of course you should. Rand blinked. Then what about her? Moirin took a breath. This was going to be delicate. She would have to reveal at least some of what she knew. Today, after she had shown you and Edram what she had achieved with the taint, he spoke to her, and she came away in great distress. She does try not to show it, but we both know she can be less than adept at covering up her emotions. You need to control that man better around her. I had been skeptical about her efforts, but now, well, if she can succeed at what she is doing with the taint, then it will transform the world, transform things for you. Nothing can be allowed to interfere with that. You think I don't know that? Rand gave a frustrated growl. You think I don't feel the taint every weight? You know Edram can channel. Moirin gave him a serene nod. Yes, Rand, I know he can channel and more than that too. You need to be careful around that man. I cannot say I approve, but I can understand the need. You know, tell Janin yes. Don't say that name out loud. Rand grimaced and ran his hand through his hair. I've no idea how you know, always poking your nose into my business. Look, the truth is I think I can trust him. Light burn me, but I think I can. I didn't at first, but since he came here. The way he came here, he's taught me everything he knows, and when the Forsaken attacked here, he took a sword blow for me. He didn't need to. He had no way of knowing Nynaeve would reach him in time. I don't understand it, not really, but he truly does seem to have had a change of heart. Moirin was skeptical, but that was not why she was here. Be that as it may, you need to rein him in around Taija. You know their history, and you know the pressure she is under. You of all people must understand pressure. Understand Moirin I do, but Rand sighed. In this case it was my fault. I said something I shouldn't have to her, something deeply unpleasant. I didn't mean to, but it just came out. I think Edram was trying to comfort her, but either way I've already had a lecture from him on my behavior. That was not what she had expected him to say, not that she would show it. Very well then, I shall not repeat it. I shall trust your judgment about Edram, much as his presence here worries me. Just do not let your guard down too far. One does not become one of the Forsaken without betraying everything that is good in the world. Most importantly, do not allow him to associate with Taija. If she finds out about him, I fear it will break her. I know, believe me, I know. So does Edram. For what it's worth, he really has done his best to avoid her. Very well, Rand. I shall allow you your sleep. Tomorrow morning we can continue your lessons on Andoran politics. Maghedian stepped out of her gateway, back in the waste yet again. The great lord knew she hated this place, but needs must. Of course she looked nothing like herself, instead transformed into a woman of the so-called dedicated, all red hair and cotton clothing. It would have broken the dedicated to pieces hearts if they'd seen what had become of their descendants. She smiled briefly to herself. It was rather amusing, in fact. Of course, her amusement didn't show on her face when she started to make her way through Cold Rock's hold. Long experience helped her to avoid close encounters with anyone, and in the evening gloom, she had little fear of any of these barbarians thinking she didn't belong. Of course, she'd checked her apparent outfit with one her servants here. It would be foolish to have her presence revealed because of an avoidable error. Blending in was key. Look at what had happened to Asmodean. Leave the arrogance to the other chosen. She knew her limits, and in many ways that was her strength. There weren't many people around at this time in the evening, which was just as she'd intended it, but there were still some. Maghedian suppressed a wince when she saw Taija Kosola stride past, muttering to herself about something. She was likely the most dangerous person here for her. Not the strongest, of course, that would be Luz Thurin, but if anyone was likely to recognize Maghedian's presence, it would be her. While Taija Kosola hadn't been particularly well known in the Second Age, it was Maghedian's business to know everything there was to know about forces of the light, and one thing she was sure of was that she wanted no part of a fight with that woman. They'd met once, in fact, in the Hall of the Servants, one of many drinks receptions. She'd seemed so empty-headed, or maybe better to say a head full of useless ideas, a true ivory tower academic. Lillian Moirel, as Maghedian had been known then, had disliked her immediately. She'd always preferred the more practically minded. The great lord only knew how the woman had transformed herself into such a dangerous fighter. It wasn't like she was any stronger in the power. In fact, they were very closely matched on paper. However, Maghedian was under no illusion how that particular fight would turn out. It was probably Samuel's fault. He'd likely bashed the clouds out of her silly little head. They truly had been inseparable until Taija Kosola's early demise. That had been the result of one of Maghedian's earlier intelligence coups, in fact. Not that she'd been targeting Taija Kosola in particular, of course. She wasn't that significant, but Ishmael had been there because of Maghedian. All because she'd been able to identify the weaknesses in the light's forces there, a perfect point at which to apply pressure. The collapse in their lines had definitely helped her standing among the chosen. Anyway, she had more important things to do than worry herself about ghosts from the past. It didn't take long to find her first contact, a tall man in the white of the sworn to peace. With a thought, she reached out and tweaked the inverted web layered over his mind, and he gave a start, looking at her wide-eyed. Excellent. Now tell me everything of importance that has happened since I was last here. She still had 4 other people to speak to. Intelligence gathering was so much more tedious in this time when she lacked a network of lesser channelers to do the grunt work for her. Great mistress. He looked adoringly at her, speaking quickly out of eagerness to tell her everything he knew. The Chief of Chiefs is planning to go to the Golden Bowl next week. He has had an argument of some sort with the Aes Sedai Taija, although I do not know what about. He looked like he wanted to cry at the admission of ignorance. I also think Edram, his swordmaster, may be able to channel. Oh, now that was interesting. Perhaps that would be enough to trade with Messana for some of her pet Aes Sedai. Maghedian leaned in, a predatory smile gracing her lips. You have done well. Tell me more about this Edram. Ravin stalked back and forth in what he now considered to be his throne room, fuming. His men still hadn't found that bitch Morghese. He'd announced her death, of course, but it was deeply inconvenient to his plans. Worse, it was an insult to him, that she'd outwitted him. An ignorant barbarian from this time, and a woman too. Even with his compulsion, she still hadn't known her place. With a growl, he threw himself into a chair. This was messing with his focus. He was losing his energy. The Lady Raswa, head of some Andoran house or other, immediately fluttered over to him in concern at his obvious annoyance. My Lord Gibril, you look tired. Let me comfort you. She leant in, her dress exposing a generous amount of cleavage, and started to rub his shoulders through the tight material of his black shirt. It was pleasant, but not what he wanted. He wanted that whore Morghese back in his bed. Not because she was anything special, he'd had better, but because she'd defied him. She needed to learn her proper place. She was probably dead, though. Lying in some gully, unable to survive in the wilderness like the weak woman that she was. No one would help her after the mess she'd made of the realm after all. He needed to think, to come up with a solution. Men weren't just there for their muscle after all. They had the strategic minds necessary for success in the world, and his was certainly sharper than most. He'd lost his pet queen, and that was causing him problems, both for his self-actualization and also for his political position. What could he do to deal with that? Of course, the solution came to him quickly once he devoted some of his considerable brain power to it. Morghese had a daughter, a great beauty by all accounts, all the better. She could solve his political problems and even be an upgrade on her mother. No doubt she'd even be more biddable given her age. Maghedian had been hinting that she had information on the girl. It would likely cost him some concessions, but he could live with that. Of the female chosen, ridiculous concept as that was, Maghedian must be the least offensive. At least she realized her place was at the back, skulking in the shadows, not in a man's place trying to lead. Chapter 78, The Karakon. Chapter text chapter lay. The Karakon. The next morning Taija was on her morning run when Rand came jogging up to join her. He was looking as awkward as he ever had, and she was reminded of just how young he really was. Alexei, could you lead the run for a while? Taija glanced at Rand, and he seemed happy enough to keep jogging, so she angled off from the group. He was actually very fit. Edram must work him hard. It was sad that he didn't come and train with her and the girls anymore. It took another minute or so of jogging before he began speaking. Taija, I just wanted to say that I'm sorry for yesterday. I don't know what came over me. Sometimes I just say things and I don't even know what they mean, but no, stop. It's all right, Rand. It hurt, I won't deny it, but I understand. You're under a lot of pressure and Taija grimaced and made herself say it. The taint can affect any man. Is it the taint? He sounded pensive. I just don't know. Sometimes I think I'm remembering things from Luz Thurin's life, just occasional snippets. Other times I think it's my imagination, just the madness closing in. Rand's face could have been carved from stone. It was heartbreaking. Really, Taija just wanted to give the poor boy a hug, but she didn't think he'd welcome it right then. She'd been so absorbed with her own problems, and he was just suffering in silence. But at the same time, she wasn't sure what he'd let her do for him. He was becoming more and more closed off. I'm sorry, Rand, I just don't know. I'm no healer, and I know nothing about the impact of the taint on people. Cadsuane's kidnapped an Aes Sedai who's meant to be an expert. He cut her off. Yes, Savridi Kennanas from the Red Adger. Yep, but she's just a massive fucking asshole with rocks for brains. Completely unhelpful. Rand barked a short, harsh laugh at her words. Did he understand them? Perhaps there is something we can do, though. She glanced over at him. You trust Nynaeve, don't you? Rand nodded and then added, yes, with my life. Good, I want you to let her examine you. She's got a talent for healing beyond anything I've ever seen before. They say the taint is impossible to affect. Well, I've already proved that wrong. Taija forced some levity into her voice. Maybe Nynaeve can bring another miracle into being. He looked more than reluctant, but eventually nodded. Yes, I can allow her to do that. As they jogged on together, Taija's mind was whirling. She couldn't let this boy, no young man, that she liked so much keep on closing himself off to everyone. Couldn't let him keep on suffering right there in front of her. He still trusted her, saw her as a friend. His apology made that clear, but that didn't change the fact that he was increasingly distant to her and to everyone else. Who could get through that, though? Get him to lower his defenses? Taija thought back to Falmy and cringed internally at the memory of her drunken words to Elaine, encouraging her to go take Rand for herself. Completely inappropriate. Also misguided, as it turned out. Her and Matt made such a sweet couple. He really was a nice boy. Light grant that she never got that drunk again. It did make her think, though. Min and Rand were clearly an item before they were split apart by events. Maybe she could do something for him there. It was something to think about. Min had ended up going to see Ewan's rebels, hadn't she? Taija still didn't know where they were hiding, but Moiraine did. Maybe she should mention it to her. Moiraine was a lot less likely to kidnap the girl than Cadsuane, but Taija would still need to emphasize the importance of Min being up for it too, and not pressuring the poor girl. Informed consent was important after all. Really, she should go and ask her herself, assuming Moiraine would tell her where. But especially after meeting Savridi, Taija really didn't want to put herself somewhere where she was hugely outnumbered by modern Aes Sedai. Call it paranoia, but she had a nagging worry she'd end up imprisoned and forced to teach them or worse. It was some weeks later that the Wise Ones announced that the clan chiefs had assembled at the Golden Bowl, and not long after that Taija had traveled there along with Rand and his ever-growing entourage. Amy's had given her the lowdown on the place, and it sounded fascinating. A canyon with such helpful acoustic effects and treated as a kind of sacred treaty place by the dedicated. Rand, of course, quickly headed off to meet with the clan chiefs, accompanied by his group of Aes Sedai and Wise Ones. Taija, on the other hand, took the opportunity to slip away and explore. People always underestimated how discreetly she could move when she wanted to avoid something. Taija ended up wandering around the rim of the Golden Bowl, alternating between admiring the canyon's geography and looking down at the hordes of dedicated gathered below. It was really a very impressive phenomenon, and she was more than tempted to try out the acoustics herself, but that would probably be rude. However, it wasn't long into her exploration that she was intercepted by a trio of spear-wielding dedicated warriors, black veils across their faces. Who are you, Wetlander, and what are you doing here? For fuck's sake. Taija embraced Sedar. My name is Taija. She was interrupted by the harsh voice of an older woman cracking out. In Arim Bandrik, you would raise spears against an Aes Sedai. All three men blanched, almost tearing the veils off their faces and giving Taija low bows. Our apologies, Aes Sedai. We did not realize. Run along before you next mistake, a wise one for a kappa, and try to hunt her. The men turned to leave. stiffly trying to cling to dignity, but moving much too fast for it to be convincing, while the wise one turned to Taija. I am Soralia of the Jarrah Sept of the Charin, dedicated. Taija Kosola Marinen, she gave her a smile. Pleased to meet you. Taija had liked all of the wise ones she'd met so far, although this one seemed a bit cold. Soralia appraised her for a second before looking unimpressed. You should be with the Chief of Chiefs at the meeting. He has asked after you. Oh, he has. Oops. Then I suppose I should go now. Can't keep the Chief of Chiefs waiting after all. Taija knew she should be treating this more seriously, but the woman was already irritating her. Soralia looked singularly unimpressed by Taija's tone. Follow, I have heard of you from Amy's, but I wish to hear it from your own mouth. Her voice made it clear that it wasn't a request. The woman was as bad as Cadswain before her attitude adjustment. Well, of course, what would you like to know? Taija made her voice as bright and vapid as she could. That got her a long look from Soralia. Amy's has said that you are somehow from the Age of Legends. You will explain. Happened to the Dedicated's respect for Aes Sedai. In fact, what happened to simple respect for a stranger? Did she need to get some wrinkles or something before strangers would be polite to her? Why did people insist on calling it that? Oh well, I don't know about the Age of Legends. I'm from a place called Adanza. We certainly didn't talk about living in legends when I was there, though. There was a bakery near where I grew up that had cakes that many people said were practically legendary, though. By the time Taija reached the large tent that she assumed Rand was having his meeting in, she was fairly sure Soralia was on the verge of exploding at her. Suddenly, she rounded on Taija. You may think this is funny, girl, but you are not so old that I cannot make you howl for your lack of respect. And there it was. Soralia had been trying to bully her for the whole walk, and now it was completely in the open. Taija kept her tone as bright and vapid as before. That's funny. The last woman to threaten me with punishment and call me girl ended up crying on the ground with several broken bones, and I was holding back. Suddenly, she switched to an ice-cold tone. I don't like bullies, and I really don't like being bullied. Keep it in mind. Like the wind, she went back to her bright, vapid voice. Shall we go in? Perhaps pushing back like that would work better than trying to be reasonable with this time's bullies. Either way, it was more entertaining. Taija followed her own words, not waiting for Soralia, and strode inside. Rand was stood with a group of men that she assumed were the clan chiefs. He didn't notice Taija at first, nor did he notice Soralia come in behind her face as hard as stone. Taija gave Amy's a friendly wave, and even smiled at Moiraine and Cadswain. They really had become far more tolerable since Tyr. The clan chiefs, however, did glance over at Taija before looking away, seemingly more alert than Rand. Then one of them, a particularly tall one with graying red hair, looked again and did a double take. It was odd since she'd never seen him before in her life. However, his reaction drew Rand's attention to her. Ah, this is Taija Sedai. Rand introduced her. One of my most trusted advisors. Most of them gave her polite nods, but the clan chief, who'd seemed surprised to see her's eyes widened, and he let out an audible hiss at Rand's words, enough that their attention was drawn back to him. Is something wrong, Bale? Rand seemed a little irritated at the interruption. I have seen her before. I'm sure we've never met. I'd remember you. He was even taller than Ruach. We have never met, I said, but your name, your face, I saw during. He glanced around the room as if checking whether it was safe to speak before continuing. Amidst the glass columns, your face on a turangreal, a plate of glass that showed images and sound. You were talking about the boar. He seemed to pull himself together after a moment, reaching for a spear. Randall Thor, this is not possible. Well, that was odd. Maybe you did see me. I gave a few interviews. It's called a television, by the way, not a turangreal. Rand followed on her words. Bale, Taija Sedai has had a long journey to be here, but she's no imposter. It's entirely possible that you did see her during your visions because she was there. The Dark One has the Forsaken. Well, we have our own ally from the Age of Legends. Taija offered them a bow and took the opportunity to enjoy people actually believing she was who she said she was for once. After the stir that her entrance caused, it quickly became clear from the conversation that the clan chiefs were accepting Rand's position as the chief of chiefs, which was great. However, it also meant that there wasn't much for Taija to contribute. They were just talking about logistics and strategy. So she quietly sidled off to the side of the tent where she could think about the taint in peace rather than be bored. An hour later, Rand was looking out over the Golden Bowl, surrounded by clan chiefs. Dull as his discussions with the clan chiefs were, even Taija had paid attention at the sudden commotion when he'd told them something. After a bit of listening, she'd realized that he was insisting that he was going to tell all of the dedicated about the visions in the glass columns. It had made sense. The dedicated deserved to know the truth if he was going to be asking them to follow him. He hadn't needed her to argue for him, of course, but while she'd been bored in the tent, Taija was well aware of what a historic moment his speech would be, and she wasn't going to miss it. She stood a little way behind him when he started to speak, listening with fascination. Somehow, at some point, he'd learnt how to captivate a crowd, and Taija joined them in hanging off his every word. In the end, despite the clan chief's protests, it was all a bit anticlimactic, though. There were shouts of denial to his words, but with all of the clan chiefs backing him, the dedicated generally seemed to have accepted what he said. Good for him. Given it's clear that my filtration web is going to be of limited practical use. And wasn't that a disappointment? I've been working on something different. Age had been thinking about her plan B for a while, and it was time to explain it to what was becoming her taint removal team. Moiraine, Cadsuane, Alexei, Elaine, Egwene, and Nynaeve, all listening to her differing levels of boredom on their faces. Also Savridi, stubbornly defiant and equally stubbornly unhelpful, although she'd been looking a bit uncomfortable recently, standing a bit oddly and shifting around. Taija floated the 2 iron rods that Tarek had made up in front of her on webs of air. So what we're going to be working on now is seeing whether untainted or filtered setting can be stored. She'd been doing a lot of the theoretical work without them over the last few weeks, but now it was time to sort out the practical side of things. Moiraine looked a bit perturbed at her words, so Taija looked over at her, raising her eyebrows. After a moment she spoke. I mentioned the Eye of the World to you before. Is this not similar? You do realize everyone involved in that died. Taija tried to suppress her irritation. It was a fair comment, but obviously she'd thought this through in some detail. Yes, I know, you told me. I've considered that, and what they likely did, and how to prevent the same consequences from occurring. I think they can't have had anything like my filtration web, which we know is safe. So they must have been doing something cruder, perhaps using their own bodies to absorb the taint. She shuddered at the thought. That would probably be a theoretically easier way to do it, but it's not something I'd even consider. I'm not going to be putting any of us in danger, don't worry. Seeing Moiraine's mollified nod, Taija continued. Cadsuane said Moiraine said if you could form your analytical webs around the first metal rod, I think we can begin. Egwene stood rigidly in front of Taija, ignoring the aches in her body and the tiredness that ran through her. The older woman studied her for a few seconds, a tightness around her eyes overlaying the sadness she didn't seem to think anyone could see in them. So, you've been digging holes for me, and the wise ones for quite a while now. Do you think it's time for you to stop? Honestly, at this point, she'd rather just have been spanked repeatedly by Shiriam, but there was obviously only one correct answer to Taija's question. I've thought long and hard on what I did, on your lessons, and why it was wrong of me. I realize it was hugely offensive, and I'll keep going for as long as I need to show that to you and the wise ones. She noticed Taija didn't comment on her leaving out Moiraine and Cadsuane. All I doing to show contrition, Taija said I. She was fairly sure she'd mangled some of the phrase, but at least she'd tried. Was that a slight softening of Taija's eyes? It was hard to tell. You say you've thought long and hard. All right. Why do you dig holes and fill them in? That was easy. Taija was far less liberal with punishments than the Tower Eyes said I had been, but she always made sure they were understood. Because it's pointless. To be Aes Sedai is to strive to serve the world and to improve yourself. Digging holes and filling them in helps nobody. It wastes my own time, gives me no pleasure, and serves no purpose. And why have you been punished for so long? More difficult, but she'd known Taija for long enough. The woman had been dropping what she was fairly sure were deliberate hints throughout their lessons. She liked to make Egwene and the other 2 girls work things out for themselves, giving them the clues they needed to get to the destination rather than just taking them there. Sometimes it drove Egwene up the wall, but it was what it was. Egwene spoke slowly. The obvious trap would be the White Tower's reasoning. That wasn't the answer that Taija wanted. One of the things you've taught us is that arrogance fundamentally isn't, or at least shouldn't be, part of being a true Aes Sedai. To claim to be Aes Sedai without having earned it showed great arrogance, inappropriate for someone who wishes to be Aes Sedai. Taija nodded, but didn't say anything. That meant she wanted more. I also took advantage of the wise ones. By lying to them about my status, I tried to deceive them into giving me more than they might have. Again, it was inappropriate behavior for someone trying to become an Aes Sedai, and it also hurt the reputation of the Aes Sedai. Her mind went back to some of the times when Taija would just stare into the distance, the way Cadsuane had initially treated her, the way Sevriti still spoke to her. Sometime came together in Egwene's mind, realization hitting her. Taija hadn't hinted at this. Should she say it? She wasn't sure. Some people might explode at it. Would Taija? I think. I think also it was a personal insult to you. You've lost so much, and being Aes Sedai, a real Aes Sedai, is one of the only things that you have from your time when you're surrounded by people you think don't deserve the title. I trampled on that after you'd taken me in as an apprentice and acted like one of them. I'm sorry. She really was. That realization was making her want to curl up into a ball. The last thing she wanted to do was to hurt the woman who'd rescued her from the Cinchen, taken her in and taught her so freely. Taija looked like she was about to say something, and Egwene hurriedly continued. She had one more point. This one she'd thought about at length. Finally, I put you in a very difficult position with the Wise Ones, and Cadsuane, and Moiraine Sedai. I know your relationship with the two Aes Sedai is tense, and I gave them an opportunity to try to use my actions against you, and she hadn't realized at first, but she'd had a lot of time to think during the misery of digging and filling holes. And you were worried about what they might all try to do to me, so you had to make sure you were seen to be punishing me sufficiently by yourself. There was a long silence, and then Taija sighed, the tightness in her face fading. I do wonder why someone as obviously intelligent as you did something so stupid, but I suppose you're very young. Egwene did her best not to bristle at that. She'd done more than most people 3 times her age. You do understand. Thank you. As far as I'm concerned, your punishment is over. I can't guarantee the wise ones will agree, but I'll speak to them. Relief coursed through Egwene, although she didn't let herself slump. Taija gave her a tired smile. The poor woman really did look exhausted most of the time these days. Egwene resisted the urge to comment on the fact Taija hadn't even bothered to mention Cadsuane and Moiraine, instead settling for a deep bow. Thank you, Taija, said I. I'll do my best not to disappoint you again. Chapter 79. To Infinity and Beyond. Chapter text, chapter Lei, To Infinity and Beyond. A week's work showed good progress for Taija. It would all be much easier if she could make Turangreel, but sadly, that was one of the areas of the power where someone needed to have the talent to be able to do anything, and she simply didn't. It was a thought, actually. Maybe she should see if one of the girls had it. She'd assumed they must have been checked at the White Tower. That was what would have happened in her time. But thinking about it, Taija wasn't sure the modern Aes Sedai actually knew how to make Turangreel. Something to worry about in the future. Anyway, there was something different that day. Cadsuane looked almost expectant, while Sevriti looked even more uncomfortable than before. When Tear had greeted everyone, Cadsuane gave Sevriti a look, and she winced before stepping forward. Taija said, I wish to apologize for my unhelpful behavior. I have reconsidered my actions, and I have realized that it would be better if I assisted you with your efforts. Taija blinked, surprised at the sudden turnaround. She'd been so determined to be unhelpful that Taija had just assumed she'd never change her mind. Oh, well, thank you, Sevriti, said I. I appreciate it. I'm sorry again for Cadsuane Sedai's removal of you from the White Tower. Hopefully at least the more civilized experience here has helped. She shot Cadsuane a look. The woman was looking particularly smug. What in the light had she done? It is of no matter. Why had Sevriti winced at that? Perhaps we could speak after you have finished your work here. Yes, that would be good, thank you. As Moiraine and Cadsuane spun their analytical webs, Taija shrugged to herself. She'd like to think reason had triumphed, but given Sevriti's behavior, she suspected Cadsuane had done something to the woman. However, she couldn't really bring herself to care. She put up with far more rudeness than she normally would because Sevriti had been kidnapped, and Taija felt bad about it. But when she'd offered to remove Sevriti from Cadsuane's care, The bloody woman had told her not to meddle in the business of true Aes Sedai. So meh. After Taija had finished a productive session, she thought she was virtually there and would be able to start imbuing clean sedin into the rods in the next few days. It was just a case of making sure that it was completely safe. After what Moiraine had told her about the Eye of the World, she'd redoubled her already semi-obsessive approach to safety. Taija stretched up towards the sky, trying to work out some of kinks in her aching muscles. She might have pushed herself a bit hard on her morning run. Still, it was important to keep the girls progressing, so she needed to make sure she was faster than them despite being shorter. Although if she was honest, that was just an excuse. Really, she should probably stop trying to compete with Avienda. She needed to just accept she wasn't going to beat her. Ha, or not. She'd get her one day. Perhaps if she slipped something into the girl's drink, as she reached up and then bent down, Taija noticed Savriti watching her, with a look of mild disapproval. Presumably it was unladylike or something. Fuck her. Still, she'd said she was ready to help, so Taija straightened up and gave her a smile. So, what can you tell me about the taint? She thought for a second. Maybe start from the beginning. What do you know about what was done to try to cleanse it during the breaking? Even with the chaos there, surely they must have tried. Why didn't they succeed? Savriti briefly looked up at the sky as she thought, before taking on a lecturing tone. Well, as you know, records are scant, and you are already aware of the Eye of the World. Yes, Moiraine told me about it. Very well, little enough is known there. I doubt that I can tell you more about that than you have already heard from Moiraine. There was one other principal effort that I know of. Records suggest that it was the main one, with, as far as I can tell, the most resources. I am afraid there is not much I can tell you from it, though. I know that they used an outpost of the Amar Dal Institute of Scientific Research. She stumbled a little over the words, but Taija nodded. It was a respectable organization. The efforts were led by Matin Kesher and Veliros. Taija's eyes widened at that. They put Matin in charge of it. Why? Savriti looked at her in confusion. What do you mean why? Was something wrong with him? No, he was a lovely man, but how can I explain it? His specialism, his area of knowledge, it doesn't really line up with this. The poor bastard, how bad must things have been? He was a better communicator than scientist, and his specialism was more astrophysics. Was he really the best they could find? Savriti didn't answer for a second, instead replying with a question of her own. You speak like you knew him. Why do you insist on persisting with your lies? Cadsuane raised a single finger and her mouth clamped shut. That bloody woman had definitely done something to her. Enough with the insults. You've already been told I'm from the Age of Legends. Taija didn't even bother getting angry, ignored her dislike of the modern term for her time. It was too important. Now keep talking. Tell me everything. What did they find? That is the problem. Records are so scant. It is known that they ultimately failed. I can only assume that this Matin died in the attempt, perhaps like the men and women at the Eye of the World. Why did Savriti's lip curl at the mention of men? Come to think of it, Taija had noticed she always refused to look directly at Alexei. Another unpleasant character trait to add to the pile she was sporting. There must be something. Before Taija realized it, she was almost touching Savriti, staring her in the face. Think, woman, think. You can't call yourself a scholar and know so little. Even theories, speculation. Savriti recoiled from her, fear in her eyes. I do not know. Let me think. There was. She really seemed far too nervous. Taija hadn't meant to frighten her. Savriti launched into an explanation of how she thought the taint affected men's minds. It became clear pretty quickly that she had no idea what she was talking about there. Taija wasn't sure she even realized that people thought with their brains, not their hearts. All right, maybe that was a bit too harsh, but much of what she was saying was patently ridiculous. Still, Taija settled down to listen. She might have something useful to say, hidden amidst all the crap. Taija must have listened to more than an hour of useless information put forward by this or that scholar from the last 3,000 years. She was starting to be unsure whether Savriti was deliberately feeding her rubbish or if the level of knowledge really was that bad. Cadsuane had told her Savriti was the most knowledgeable woman in the world when it came to the taint, though, and surely that had to be worth something. Just when Taija was starting to consider calling it a day, Savriti finally said something interesting. Of course, it is generally considered that the taint is finite, so in theory it might expire by itself in the distant future. I'm sorry, what? Please, could you repeat that? Taija was suddenly alert. The taint may expire by itself in the distant future. I do not see why that is use. No, before that. You said the taint is finite. Oh yes, that is the generally accepted view among scholars. Savriti had the cheek to sound like Taija was a fool for not knowing that. Still, that was interesting. If the taint was finite, then that changed everything. Possibly. Maybe, just maybe. Is there some kind of basis for thinking that? Or is it just speculation? Taija couldn't just rely on an unsupported hypothesis. The stakes were simply too high. Savriti leant back, almost offended at being questioned. The woman was in no way a scientist. Well, I dare say some of the most knowledgeable scholars of the last 3,000 years have said it. Yes, Taija sighed, but what is their reasoning for it? Well, there have been theories about the speed at which men go insane from the taint, you see. The woman liked the sound of her own voice, but at least this was interesting and potentially relevant. Taija listened carefully to her rambling through the thought processes of various scholars. It did sound like there was some circumstantial evidence, but was it enough for her to go on? Then she hit pay dirt. Of course, Melin Oldata spoke of incomprehensible notes that she had seen preserved from the eye of the world, which were said to prove the theory. The team that created some clean sedin but died. I thought you said that you had nothing to add about them. Savriti didn't allow the question to break her Aes Sedai composure. As I said, the notes were incomprehensible, useless. What do you mean by incomprehensible? Were they preserved? Taija wanted to grab her and shake the answers out of her. Oh, she looked smug at that question. Too smug. As a matter of fact, they were just a few meaningless sentences in the old tongue. Her smugness faded. However, as I said, they defied comprehension. No scholar could decipher them. I have tried extensively. Of course they couldn't. Where can I find a copy of these preserved notes? In the White Tower. Taija was already starting to plan how she'd break into the library there, who she should impersonate, what to do if she needed to fight her way out. It would be very risky, but some risks would be worth taking. Savriti might have seen something in her eyes because she hurriedly assured Taija, I have spent long enough poring over them. I am sure I can recite them for you. Taija waited a second as Savriti smiled, clearly pleased with herself. Well, go on then. She carefully kept the growl out of her voice. Savriti really was a deeply irritating woman. Savriti took a deep breath, paused again. At that point, Taija was fairly sure she was doing it deliberately, and then slowly started to speak, clearly reciting from memory. The 13th dimensional barrier Twen Sedin and standard 4th dimensional spes Deemtrits, a split of proximat 33 micratos, sitting across the dimensional juncton for a distance of 1,556 vision years in all directions. Drawing on Sedin through said gap results in the touching the taint. We have been unable to dict the taint directly. However, that gap was not present prior to Luz Thurin's attack. The space allows us to endiactly measure the quantity of the taint, and that is all that was recorded. Her accent was appalling, particularly when it came to more technical terms, and Taija strongly suspected that there had been some transcription errors across the years, so it took her a few seconds to parse out what Savriti actually said. When she did, she found she was smiling. Yes. Yes, it was what she needed. The terms she was hearing from Savriti would be meaningless to anyone from this time. There was virtually no chance they'd just been made up, and if they were measuring in micrometers, then they clearly had some solid measurements. Along with the much vaguer information from post-breaking scholars, this gave her just about enough to be confident that they were right, and the taint was finite. It wasn't like she had much other choice anyway. Barely anyone would even be able to spin her filtration web. Taija was fairly sure that she would be able to make and store untainted sedin in the next few days, without anyone dying from it, but that didn't matter if the quantities were relatively tiny. It might allow Rand, Alexei, and Edram to safely practice channeling to some degree, but not much beyond that. Clearly, the team at the Eye of the World had been well equipped if they'd had such precise interdimensional measurements. Some serious analytical Turingriel for sure. Certainly not like Taija's situation, where she had a couple of talented but half-drained women doing their best to imitate a Turingriel for her. However, her best guess was that they just couldn't figure out how to detect and therefore directly affect the taint. They must have ended up clutching some kind of solution together that was more dangerous than the taint itself. Perhaps they used their own bodies to absorb it. Light only knew why. If they'd had her filtration web or an equivalent, then none of them needed to die. Still, that didn't matter. They were long gone. Savriti had given her enough. She had the pieces of the puzzle she needed. Taija could detect and measure the taint. She could affect it. She'd already proven that. Now all she needed to do was to destroy it, and that was trivial. She hadn't thought there was much point in trying to do that if it was infinite like Sedin. But 30 micrometers over a 1.5 light-year radius. That was a sphere with a radius of roughly 8 kilometers. It was a huge quantity, but it wasn't an impossible quantity. She'd need to come up with the right web, but she'd been playing with that already in her head, more as idle thought than a serious attempt. There just hadn't seemed to be much point when there would always be more of the taint. With a start, Taija realized they were all staring at her. Ha, if only they knew. Alexei, Nynaeve, would you mind linking with me? I want to try something. A few seconds later, she was in control of the flows. First, she spun Sedar, trying something she'd been pondering in spare moments. Over the next few seconds, Taija brought together a stupidly complex web, forming an oddly twisted sphere of spirit, with strands of all of the elements woven together feeding through to a knot of Sedar at its core. If she was right, the interactions there should convert the taint into, well, not nothing. She couldn't turn something into nothing, except with balefire anyway, but she could turn it into nothing dangerous. Mentally rubbing her hands together, Taija drew on Sedin through Alexei, ignoring the stomach-turning sense of the taint washing over her. Then she hesitated. Actually, please could you all just clear a bit of a space around my web? Maybe 10 meters should do it. Also, cover your eyes. She quickly spun a web of air and earth over her own eyes, blocking out most light. Taija glanced around, and when she was satisfied that they were taking her seriously, she channeled a trickle of Sedin, forcing it into her sphere. She didn't bother shaping it into any particular web, just pushing simple flows at it. As soon as they touched the sphere, they seemed to be snatched into it, and a light started to glow. Taija fed more power into the flows, and the light brightened. She also started to feel the heat, even at a distance. It was working. With a grin, Taija drew as much as she could from Alexei, funneling it in. The light became blinding, and she had to take a step back to avoid getting burnt. After a second, she released the power, feeling the ecstasy fade from her. Where she'd spun her web, the ground was fused into blackened, dirty glass, still radiating heat. A few of the others were blinking rapidly. Presumably they looked at it, even after her warning. After a moment, Cadsuane asked, "Well, that may have been fascinating," Taija said, but what exactly was that?" Now it was her turn to be smug. Taija gave her a big grin and said, "That was the beginning of the end of the taint." At her confused look, she continued, "That web was denaturing the taint, converting it into harmless light and heat." She glanced back at the melted ground. "Well, mostly harmless light and heat. All of the taint on the Sedin that I channeled no longer exists." "That sounds fantastic, but how does that help Rand or Alexei channel safely?" Egwene sounded as confused as the others looked, but some of them, Elaine, Nynaeve, and Moiraine, were starting to nod. "It's simple. If the taint is infinite like Sedin, then the only way round it is to filter or block it. However, if the taint is finite, then it can be expended. Every bit of it that's destroyed is less of it to trouble us in future." Taija would have been dancing around with delight, but there was still a big problem. Lifetimes of channeling wouldn't remove all of the taint. She wasn't strong enough, and she doubted many other women could even spin her web. Then there was the issue of Sedin. She only knew a few male channelers, and they certainly didn't have lifetimes to work on it. The only problem is power. There's a lot of taint, and we don't have infinite time or many channelers at all to do anything with it. Taija thought for a second. "I'll have to speak to Rand about Calendor, although I suspect even that won't be anywhere near powerful enough to be useful. Then maybe we can have a think about where we can get a female sangreal or 3 to match it." It might not be an immediate solution, but now she had something to work on, and maybe things could be refined. Chapter 80, Interlude Roman 25, Why Has the Light Forsaken Us? Chapter text Interlude Roman 25, Why Has the Light Forsaken Us? An extract from a comprehensive record of the breaking by Olivin Anelder, the last copy of which was believed to have been lost during the Trolloc Wars. Naturally, what was left of the government had to react following the strike on Sheol Gull and the tainting of Sedin. It appears that at first the primary effort was focused on continuing the war against the Shadow, as its forces remained active, if disorganized. Following the sealing of the Boar, see chapter Roman 4 for more details on this. This, of course, made sense in the context of the time and devastating war that was just starting to come to its conclusion. Despite their incredible wisdom and knowledge, it seems that it took the Aes Sedai and what was left of the Grand Council some time to understand what had happened to Sedin. Perhaps they were simply distracted by the madness of the 100 Companions and the destruction they wrought, along with the ongoing war. Without wishing to belabor the point, records from the breaking and the times before it are inevitably sparse, even after only 500 years, which of course would leave us firmly within the lifespan of stronger Aes Sedai from the more utopian past, if only any had survived. However, from what little I have been able to piece together in both primary and secondary sources, I do believe that a wide societal effort swung into action after some delay. I think it is clear that the belief was initially that it was only the 100 Companions that had gone insane. A terrible problem, but presumably a manageable one with the resources of the time. Once it was realized that the madness was not limited to the 100 Companions, and more of the male Aes Sedai were joining the ranks of the insane, greater efforts were undertaken. The remains of the Grand Council assigned what resources they had to the cause of removing the taint, and a number of efforts began around the world. No doubt I lack records of some of them, but it is clear that some were better resourced than others. As readers will know, all of these attempts ultimately bore no fruit, and as was most likely inevitable, men cursed with the ability to channel continue to suffer and kill to this day. Nevertheless, it appears that it took many years for the world to truly accept the irrevocable nature of the taint. I believe it does our ancestors credit that they appear to have gone to such efforts to cleanse Sedin. However, I must wonder whether those efforts could have been better spent on protecting those that survived and dealing with the threat that the remaining male Aes Sedai represented. Perhaps more could then have been saved from the madness and destruction of the breaking, rather than being wasted in futile efforts to prevent the inevitable. It is unlikely that the truth will ever be known, but it does stand as a warning against focusing on a lost cause. In this chapter, I shall set out my understanding of those efforts and their lack of results. May the Creator have mercy on the souls of those who tried. I begin with what I believe to be one of the best primary sources in existence. What is left of the diary of Matan, Kesher, and Veliros. It is incomplete, and what still exists is damaged in many places, but it remains one of the most valuable guides to the sheer futility and waste of the efforts to cleanse the taint. Matan Kesheran's death also illustrates the foolishness of attempting to work with tainted Sedin and the men cursed to channel it. I have copied what is left of the relevant parts of his diary below, word for word, so that the reader may make their own judgment. For context, Matan Kesheran Veliros was one of the leading scholars of the Age of Legends, although little is known of him beyond that. His prominence can be seen from the fact that he had a third name, a high honor in those times, as readers will be aware. It seems that he was believed to be the man best placed to attempt to cleanse the taint. In his diary, he names other individuals as being better qualified, but it is not clear if this is false modesty or simply desperation derived from his own failures. Sadly, no records remain of any of those individuals, although given they all had third names, they surely had many great achievements of their own. One of the countless tragedies of the breaking is the sheer number of historic individuals who have simply been forgotten by history. I shall provide my analysis of the diary's contents following the extracts. The Diary of Matan Kesheran, Veliros, 15, January 5890 Selith Lininios, came for me today. I was just sitting at home, wondering what had happened to the world, trying to decide what to do, and she burst in, shielded me, and dragged me in front of an emergency adger from the Hall of Servants. Not that there's much left of that anymore. Still trying to replicate the pomp and ceremony, pointless as that is these days. It's not even that I minded being shielded. I don't want to channel this vileness. It's horrific. I just want to vomit every time I see Sedin. What did Luz Thurin even do? But the rudeness, it's unforgivable. What's happening to us that you can just kidnap someone from their home because you need them? We have laws, human rights for a reason. The Aja said they want me to lead a team using the Amar Dal Isser's holier branch. Apparently it's the only place they know with surviving facilities. I tried to tell them that I'm not the person they're looking for, that I can't help them, to just let me enjoy what's left of my retirement in peace, but they wouldn't listen. Bloody women. They said I'm one of 2/3 named physicists left alive on the planet. Surely that can't be right. There must be others. I can't think of any now, but there must be. I told them I'm an astrophysicist and they didn't care. Told me I could choose between being severed as a threat to them all and doing as I was told. It was outrageous. I know things are bad, but what happened to laws, civilization, even human kindness? Is madness my fate too? I don't know. Everyone looks at me suspiciously now. It's difficult, even if I understand why, but there's nothing I can do about it. Hopefully this will pass. We won the war after all, or are winning. Surely we must be. The Dark One's sealed, but everything's still wrong. Creator, protect us. 23 January 5890. I've tried to channel as little as possible. I can't stand the way it feels. They told me that other than finishing the war, this project was the absolute top priority. Anyone I needed I could have, straight off the front lines. Any other project, mine. But there's nobody. They've given me a bunch of half-drained PhD students and traumatized soldiers to work with. Just 2 postdocs. Some of the PhD students are still probably better suited to this than I am. Light. I heard Kamala Danson is gone, buried under a mountain. I don't think I can do this, but I realize I have to. Never mind the shadow, this madness is going to destroy us before the Trollocs can. Can I really be the best there is? I heard that Varavahinan Vailva is leading another effort halfway across the world. They've stuck her in that light-forsaken facility up near Marley and great equipment, but why anyone would want to live somewhere that cold I don't know. She's far better suited to this than I am. She should be leading both our efforts, or at least we should be collaborating, but gateways don't work properly anymore. It's almost impossible to communicate, let alone travel. We can't even share much. Light help us all. I have a pile of books on my desk. I'm trying to teach myself a whole new field from undergraduate lectures I heard getting on for 500 years ago. I'm too old for this shit, but I've got no choice. 15 February 5890, at least Lisser's analytical Turingriel are intact and top-notch. They must have been upgraded right before the war began. It's not like the government's been spending much money on research that doesn't involve blowing things up since then. Whatever happened to the world I loved? Fucking Mirin Iranil, that's what. It's been a real challenge getting some of these children trained up enough to use the things, though. Hardly any of us other than me are strong enough either. They're having to form circles just to power the Turingriel. No standing flows anymore. Apparently electricity is difficult everywhere. The Isser actually has an archaic geothermal generator, though, so at least we have some comforts. I wonder who signed off on the budget for that. I'd like to thank them, but they're probably dead. Noran Moeror nearly came across the facility today. He's strong, far too strong. We were all in a big circle, ready to try to drive him off, but something must have distracted him because he turned away. Thank the light. I don't want to have to kill anyone, let alone someone I know. Nu, why has this happened? Why did the Creator let this happen? 28 February 5890. I'm so tired. We got our first results through from the analytical Turingriel, and I stayed up all night studying them. So did Aliella and Hanin. I know I'm nominally in charge, but we all know they've got a better chance of working this out than I have. Just because they haven't got third names, barely out of their doctorates in fact, doesn't mean I know more than them. I thought Hanin might have had a crush on me before, even if don't swing that way, but every time she looks at me now it's either fear or disgust in her eyes. Why has this been done to us? We didn't deserve this. At least the Turingriel had excellent resolution, and we certainly have no shortage of the taint to study. But there's nothing. I don't really understand what I'm seeing, but as far as I can tell, the scans are just going straight through it. It's like the taint's not there, yet every man here can feel it sinking its vileness into their bones. I need to do more reading. I've got to work this out before it's too late. 14 March 5890. Arndl started raving about spiders in the walls yesterday. In the end, all we could do was give him an overdose of morphine. He was only 21. I had to lock myself in my office for a couple of hours afterwards. How can I even look anyone in the eye after that? I just killed a man. I've never killed anyone before. Is this what's waiting for all of us? I can't stand it. The men are all terrified that they'll be next. The women are watching us out of the corner of their eyes. I think they'd be happier if they could just sever all of us, but they can't. They need us. Isn't that insane? The women want to sever the men. If I said that to someone a year ago, they'd have thought I was mad. What happened to us? 17 March 5890, still nothing. I haven't been getting anywhere near enough sleep, but I can't let myself rest. I'm trying everything I can think of, changing settings, channeling different webs, using different Turangreal. Then I'm staying up reading, trying to learn a whole new field. I don't really know what I'm doing, just trying to remember old papers that I half read, but they're all looking to me, even the women. Selith visited today too. She was clearly angry with our lack of progress, but what more can we do? I'm doing my best, so is everyone else. She said if I didn't do better, they'd find someone else. I told her, please do. I wish there was someone else. This damned war, it's taken so many of the best from us. I know some of them would have cracked this. They must have been able to. So many people dead, and I can't stop thinking of them. I don't even know how many people remember them anymore. The greatest names in our field and practically forgotten already. I won't forget them, though. I won't. Oris Hinanch Namaga. He ended up worshipping at Greendel's feet. I saw him there when they hacked the broadcast systems, so ruggedly handsome and so clever behind those big green eyes. I wish I'd asked him out when I had the chance. No one could possibly deserve what that monster did, but particularly not him. Taija Kosola Murinen. Ishmael killed her years ago. She was such an odd little lady, hanging out in Jalanda. Young too, not much past 150, but the things she could do with the power, true genius. Why she went out to fight on the front lines, I'll never know. Too young to die. Gaydun Kenner, darling. He might have been old, but his mind was as sharp as ever. He could see so deeply into things. I think he died trying to defend Tizora from one of those madmen. What a waste. Him and the dedicated to peace. I shudder every time I think about it. There's a lot that makes me shudder these days. Sivia Siro's Lathalin, a strong, intelligent woman, but not strong enough to save her from Mirin Iranil. That woman's sheer bitter pettiness. Light. Fuck the Forsaken, but fuck Mirin Iranil in particular. I need to stop doing this to myself. I need a drink. 14 May 5890, yet more futile effort. Is it just impossible? Nothing I try works. Nothing. I really think the women are becoming more and more paranoid. They're all looking at us sideways. I've stared checking my drinks and food for poison. They're terrified that we're going to go mad and kill them all. I'm not mad. Not yet, but the world certainly is. I can't even fault the women for being terrified. I certainly am. 6 July 5890, we've at least started having some tiny bits of success now. It's lucky that we are, or I'd have given into despair long ago. We've established that the taint seems to sit in a gap between Sedin and real space. But that's by finding the gap. With some careful calibration of the dimensional analysis matrix, we still can't detect the fucking thing. All we're seeing is the absence of anything rather than the taint itself. How can we do anything with it if we can't even detect it? How can we not detect it when we can feel it every time it touches us? We have Turangreal here, capable of detecting things on the subatomic level, and they can't beat my own sense of horror. Oh, light, the feel of the taint is so disgusting. Yet I have to channel every day to try to make progress. We still can't find any sensor that will detect the taint. I don't know if it's just the team here, or if it's simply impossible. The Dark One has done something, I don't even know what. If the Dark One was obvious or easy to beat, we'd have won the war long ago. I opened the floor up to everyone for ideas long ago. They put me in charge because of my third name, typical military, not understanding how specialisms work. But there are plenty of more junior people with more expertise in this. And even studied under Gaydun Kenner for a while. Nothing's worked, though. Nothing at all is working. Is this our fate? Choosing between killing everyone around us or going quietly into the night. 12 July 5890, I definitely saw Aliella slip something into my drink today. I didn't say anything, I just got myself a new one. We need her even if she is so scared of me going mad that she's willing to try that. I need to be careful, though, very, very careful. The women have got good reason to be afraid of us men, but I'm starting to be afraid of them too. This all started with Latra Parsi Decume and Luz Thurin Teleman's stupid argument. I mustn't let myself get sucked into that ridiculous division. This is too important. 3 August 5890, I went outside for the first time in 2 months. I wanted to see the sun. I can't take it much longer, being locked inside that building with so many people who want to kill me because I could go mad any second, or who might go mad any second themselves. It's meant to be summer. There was no sun, just brown-gray dust clouds blocking out the light as far as the eye could see. What's happening to the world? Is there even anything left to save? 6 August 5890, our contact from the Adger is a week overdue. I'm starting to think we might be the only ones left. Nalem went mad today. He started smashing his way through walls, raving about how he was going to kill the Trollocs. 3 of us dead, plus him, of course. There was so much blood. I can't give up, but it's hard not to. 31 August 5890, everything's falling apart. Another 2 of the men have gone mad. I just had a screaming argument with Hanin and Aliella in front of everyone. They said it's too dangerous to keep working like this, that the men are all going mad. I told them they were mad themselves, and I knew what they were up to. Eventually, we apologized to each other, but it's a wasted day with no progress. Not that we were making much anyway. I've got an idea for a new array with a set of 4 Turangreal. If we can get a deep enough scan, maybe that'll give us what we need. Hopefully we can try that before Hanin and Aliella snap. I can see how stressed they are by, well, everything. All the men are twitchy too, and I'm wondering how much of it is madness and how much is just fear. 5 September 5890, a few of the women have vanished. I think they've probably run away, maybe to find their families. I want to condemn them for it. This is more important than anything else we could possibly be doing. But how can I? If I wasn't so old, I'd be tempted too. I suppose it's lucky that I'm alone. It makes this that little bit easier. Now I have to worry about other people running away, though. One more thing to worry about. 30 September 5890, I'm fairly sure Hanin and Aliella tried to kill me today. They must think I've gone mad and need to be put down, but they know I'm too strong to face head-on. I was trying to get readings from the quantum mirror, and when I connected to it with spirit, it shattered, explosively. Luckily, I've only got a few scratches, but it could have been so much worse. They're wrong, of course. I'm not mad, not yet. I'm going to have a talk with them about this. They can't keep on doing this. If they won't work under me anymore, then they need to leave. I've put up with their paranoia because I understand where it's coming from, but I can't allow them to sabotage the project. We're the only hope left in the world. 2 October 5890, I think this might be my last diary entry. Everything's gone wrong. I had a talk with Hanin and Aliella in my office, but I think the other men must have gone mad. I've locked the door, put up wards, but I can hear them hammering away at them from outside, howling for my blood. Hanin and Aliella are refusing to help. They're just sitting there judging me. What have I done to deserve this? The war was over. We won. I just wanted to enjoy a peaceful retirement. I don't know what to do. I don't want to die.